What's that knocking at your door? Who would possibly be calling your name from outside your window at 3 a.m.? It seems there might be something terrifying just outside the safety of your own home. Over the past few months, I've covered some truly creepy encounters with alleged skinwalkers and wendigos. Here is over an hour of the creepiest stories sent to me over the summer of 2018. My mom grew up near northern Wisconsin, and she told me some of her old stories a while back, which happened to her, her brothers, and their area. And some of them I feel are worth mentioning. I've had my own paranormal experiences, which I feel are quite difficult to talk about. And I've talked about a few of them in the past. Maybe I'll share some more. For some backstory on my family, my mom grew up rather poor on a junkyard in the country in northern Wisconsin. For anyone who isn't familiar with Wisconsin, this is the part of Wisconsin that tends to have long stretches of forest and a lot of beautiful nature and scenic views. One of the stories my mom told me was something that happened to a family that apparently lived nearby. There was a family driving through the forest, and eventually their car broke down. This would have been in the 70s or 80s, before cell phones were widespread, so they ended up going out of their vehicle and making the journey home on foot. Eventually, however, they started to notice sounds from behind them, as if something was following them through the woods, or perhaps more aptly put, stalking them through the woods. When they ran, it ran. When they stopped, it stopped. Eventually, they were able to get to their house. However, when they quickly entered, slammed the door and locked it, whatever was following them gave them a bellowing scream. Apparently the family had alerted my grandfather as to what happened, and he told them to look in his fields. According to my mom, he had apparently came back into the house wide-eyed and alarmed, but he didn't elaborate on what he saw. I vaguely recall my mom talking about seeing some sort of glow in the field, though. I'm unsure if it's related, but my oldest uncle went horseback riding with a friend, and they apparently came across a thing. Apparently it was white, and when they saw it, it ran off. It stood up on its hind legs, bounced on a fence, and was gone. Apparently, it left behind some fur, which my uncle apparently collected. But this would have been many, many years ago, and my uncle died when I was about 4 years old in a bad accident, so I'm unable to ask him about the story. I'm unsure if both of these stories are related or not, and there could be some natural causes to this. Black bears, wolves, dogs, etc. all could be and would be living in the area. However, judging by the tone of the story, and the fact that such animals are rather commonplace and it was apparently during the day, I'm not sure if it would be mistaken identity or not. What does interest me, though, is the stories of the Wendigo, which I have heard some depictions being somewhat furry from Canada. Skinwalkers and the Wisconsin's Michigan Dogman could maybe be related, I don't know. If it was not a case of mistaken identity, I don't really care to find out either. Just be careful in the woods. Mother Nature can be a cruel mistress, and there is darkness in this world, be it supernatural or the very, very real depths of human depravity and cruelty. Protect yourself and your loved ones.
I work as a paramedic in Louisiana. Needless to say, after being in this profession for a while, you'll see your fair share of creepy things. However, nothing I've experienced could top this. The unit that I work on is quite rural compared to most others in our fleet. It was a busy night, so we were posted at a halfway point between our station and another in town to cover both parts of the area. We liked to post off the road about a quarter of a mile into the woods so we would not be bothered while we were there. It was late, so my partner and I got to the back of our unit because there is much more room to stretch out and relax in the back. My partner was asleep, and I was messing around on my phone. I felt something bump into the side of our unit, shaking the whole truck. Now, our trucks are heavy, and it would take a substantial amount of force to shake it like I had felt. I woke my partner and told him, but he brushed it off, thinking I may have been dreaming or something. Then it happened again. He immediately shot up and looked out the window, and I did the same. We couldn't see a thing outside, and it was too dark.
And God,
you like
Cause
that's what friends
are supposed to
My
do.
partner stayed behind, looking out the window.
What's the little?
As soon as I turned them on, partner gasped and jumped back to the window.
Yeah.
Ooh. Let's see.
You can count on me, 'cause I can count.
Find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea. I sailed the world to find you. If you ever find yourself lost in the dark and you can't see, I'll be the light to guide you.
Oh,
Find out of
when we are
called
called
to help our friends in need. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3. I'll be there. And I know when I need it, I can count on you. Like 4, 3, 2, I'll be there. 'Cause that's what friends are supposed to do, oh yeah. Ooh, ooh,
can count on me.
Fuck.
Oh,
So high.
man, we should make a duo, like totally. Let's make a group. Let's go sing.
Yeah, let's do
take
it.
over the world, man. Actually, I'm enjoying this shit.
Yeah, that was fun.
How old are you, dude?
25. I'm old.
Oh, guess my age.
16.
Come on, do I sound like 16?
No? No, well, some people have really deep voice. Okay. 20.
18.
Damn. Almost.
Yeah. Let's go another song.
Lady running down to the river.
Oh, baby, to the night, na, na, na. The lyrics of that song are like,
Hey. That's so high.
yeah.
And they come unstuck. Lady running down to the riptide, taken away to the dark side. I wanna be your life. I love you when you're singing that song. I got a lump in my throat, 'cause you're gonna sing the words wrong. Ooh,
I don't know the rest of the lyrics.
Me neither.
Na 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 na.
Na, na.
Way to the dark side.
I wanna be your left hand.
I love you.
Wait, this is slow. Yeah.
What are the others?
I've got a girl crush. Hate to admit it, but I've got a hard rush.
I don't know.
I got it real bad.
I wanna know
On
the lyrics.
everything she has.
Tell me the
On
lyrics.
that midnight laugh.
How can I keep up? My life.
I wanna taste her lips. Yeah, 'cause they taste like you.
Yeah, yeah.
I wanna drown myself in a bottle of her perfume.
Let's drown together.
Yeah, but right now, over me. Come together right now, over me.
Cause all of me loves all.
Love the song.
Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Give your all to me. I'll give my all to you. You're my end and my beginning. Even when I lose, I'm winning. Cause I'm giving all of me. Yeah.
What would I do without your smart mouth? Drawing me in and kicking me out. Got my head spinning, no kidding. I can't pin you down.
I forgot the lyrics, but
Mystery ride. I'm so dizzy, don't know what it means, but I'll be alright. My hands are so high, hands underwater, but I'm breathing fine. You're crazy
and I'm out of mind.
All of me loves all. You were so low. Love your curves and all your edges, all your perfect imperfections. Let's give your all to me, and I'll give my all to you. You're my end
And then my beginning. Yeah, yeah.
When I lose, I'm winning, cause I give you all of me.
Yeah, that was pretty good.
And you get
all of you.
Whoa, whoa.
And I give you all.
I'm done.
I'm trying. Oh, it's so cold out here.
Look at it. Oh, how many times
I want you to rape me.
Tell you, even when you cry and you're beautiful too.
and my head's
What is beating you down around?
Right. Your hair.
You say I'm crazy.
Yeah,
You don't think I know what you've done.
I don't know the lyrics.
When you call me baby, I know I'm not the only one.
No, you.
You've been so unavailable. Oh,
Just kill the man. Play that.
Cause you only need the light when you're slow. Only miss the sun when it's hard to slow. Only know the love when you let it go.
and you
Only know you and how when you only have a road when you're missing home. Only know you love her when you let her go. And you let her go.
Pom pom. Pom pom pom.
Mama, how does it go? Mama,
Just let you know.
against his head.
Pull my trigger, now he's dead.
Oh my god.
Why did God
Let your heart speak out. I'm throwing it all away.
Mama? Ooh, why the world is make you cry?
If I'm not
Again this time tomorrow.
Carry on.
You know what
Nothing really matters.
What the fuck?
Who is that? Let me read
Wait,
it.
what song? I'll sing.
We were singing a song, like carry on playing the shake guitar thing, whatever it was. I don't know what it
Alright, you know what, boys?
Panda.
Yeah, right.
You made me
Play-
do it.
Ben, right.
What the fuck is
Who
this?
is you talking right now?
Yeah, now come on, boys. Let's now sing a song. What song should we sing?
I'm playing this song right now.
It was all yellow.
Fucking Gucci gang.
Gucci, hi, everyone.
Despacito!
Who's the guy with the
Despacito!
Who's the guy with the
Despacito!
Who's the guy with the ukulele?
Oh, someone's putting on Bohemian Rhapsody, come on.
I can't hear shit!
Escape from reality.
I can't hear shit. Come on, sing.
It's karaoke.
Easy come, easy go. Little high, little low. Close doesn't even matter to me. To me.
Mama.
Best part, what the
Man.
I have never heard this song.
against this much bigger now it's there. Hey,
Why is that so loud? Jesus Christ.
I heard just, but now you wanna... Come on, bro.
I need some paracetamol after this phase. Fucking hell.
Alright, you know what? Oh my goodness, that sounds like something I didn't want to say, but alright.
That's my favorite song.
Well, thanks for the headache, guys, but I'm gonna go.
And this time,
Okay, bye.
don't come back, fucking scumbag. Alright. I cannot believe what just happened. So,
It's unusual like a dogger at work. The first cut is the deepest, but the rest of it.
nah, I think you're lying, dude. It's not
You
true.
build your heart of plastic, cynical and sarcastic, and end up in a corner on your own. No,
No, I
fuck
think
these
you're
negative songs.
No, I think he's lying.
Yeah, I'm actually lying. Don't trust
We're gonna against these.
We're going
Baby love.
baby rocket ship.
Mama,
Going
Through the sky, Albert Einstein.
now.
Let's get the grandpa. Okay.
Did you guys know the song "Love of My Life" by Queen?
I don't think so.
Oh, come on. It's the best song.
Hi, Cardi B.
Love of My Life.
The real Cardi B.
Is that a real Bardi B key?
Totally Bard. Bardi C.
C. Yeah, Bardi C.
C. Yeah.
Put a gun against my bomb, mama.
Baby love.
Just begun.
No, I got through it all.
Hallelujah.
Mother. Ooh, I don't wanna die. If I'm, I didn't mean.
I'm not-
You know what? Fuck it. It's too late.
No, you didn't, mate.
No, I didn't mean.
Wait. Shut up for a second.
Hit or miss. I guess they never miss. Huh? You got a boyfriend. I bet you never
it's just-
miss.
Nah, that doesn't go
You
well.
can't do that
man.
shit. You can't do that.
Oh, that's fucking cringy.
Love of my life. You put me. Hey,
Hi.
broken my
Yeah, he's alive.
now you.
Tell that bitch I'm sorry, yo.
It's every day, bro, with the Disney Channel.
Channel
Fire.
No, shut the fuck up.
Never done before.
Shut
Fire.
the
All the
fuck
competition,
up.
man. PewDiePie is next. That fuck. My God.
Okay then, man. Whatever you say.
And I'm coming with the crew making song. Oh my God.
Love of my life, can't you see?
I'm the type A, I don't think you want no action. Sir, it's a passion. Yo, what's let's get to Smith and Wesson made my
Oh no, song.
I'm flossing. Oh, I don't know.
I'm flossing on you.
Looking in on you. I'm driving
I'm driving on you.
I bite a dildo. Baby, lock the door and turn the light. Well, turn some music on the soft and slow. Spooky, we ain't got no place to go. Hope you understand. I've been thinking about this all day long, you know. Found this feeling, yeah, that was quite strong. Spooky, how old are you first? Cause that is like, I don't want to be a pedophile. Hope you understand. Hey, no. Fuck, same age. That's a win.
Yay!
Where are you from?
I am from New Hampshire.
When you're eating her puss, what's oh, and it tastes just like her bros. Oh. What? 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 Okay, let me send you some my memes.
Yeah, my memes are good.
Let's see us better.
Shut up, look at
If you want to.
Wait, are you Asian?
No.
When you got a degree in...
Sure, yeah. Look at this. Wait.
I have a video of a person sucking his dick, but whatever.
What? I mean, that's possible if you only have a big dick. But if you have a small one,
it's not that big.
Wow.
Bye.
What the fuck?
Angelic face.
I'm sorry. Oh, shit.
The whole world to see you. Yeah, I like you so much. I want to cuddle you and keep you safe. Dax.
Colin, what are you doing? Are you putting up the new shower curtain?
I am putting up in the chair.
Okay.
Until death.
Oh, I just like choked myself with my own necklace.
Hot.
Hot.
Houston, do you copy?
Hello.
Faggot alert.
Houston, do you copy?
No.
Houston.
No.
We got what?
Houston, do you copy?
No.
Houston, there's a hole in our ship. Do you copy?
We don't give a fuck. Do you copy?
Yeah, I copy.
Copy your homework.
Yeah, shut the fuck up. Faggot. Copy.
Sorry, I don't know what you're saying.
Over. Copy.
That's not how that works.
I know. I realized when I said it. I'm tired.
Well, maybe you should go to sleep.
No. I just woke up.
That seems like a personal problem.
I have $40 in the back of my phone and I didn't even realize it until now.
Holy shit, my ping is really fucking high. Welcome to the ear rape chat.
Thank you.
Oh, that's a nice voice changer.
Anyone want
Thank
$40?
you. Yes,
I want a million.
Fuck off, you
I spent $40 on this voice changer.
That's a stupid investment to make.
You're a fucking queer.
Yes, I am.
You're fucking queer.
I don't even know what queer means.
Gay. It means gay.
Fuck. Not.
I've exposed myself.
Young Czech wrestling really.
Cha-ching.
Baby, lock the door and turn
Turn the light
down low.
sound of music just soothes my soul.
Oh, I will put it down your throat. Oh, you understand?
Be careful what you say here. Everyone here sounds underage except for one guy.
Dun 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 dun.
I've been playing Fortnite the whole night long.
Leviathan, I got a divorce because you didn't reply to me within like 4 hours of me messaging you, so.
What the fuck?
Maybe put a dick on your soul.
What?
What?
I got married and divorced within 24 hours.
Baby,
I mean, we can remarry if you'd like, but you have to reply to me eventually.
Oh my god, I just watched an elephant birth.
What?
You still haven't replied to my message, so.
What messages?
I sent you a message. I was like, hi.
Oh, she's trying to find a boyfriend.
Did
you actually just steal my picture?
Fight.
I thought that was you. What the fuck?
Oh my god. Dude, this girl just stole my pics. Oh.
Yo. Wait, what is that? No, fake gamer girl has the other one.
No, you need to take
Yo.
That is my picture.
I'm so confused. What is going on?
Take off that photo. That is my photo, okay? I had to browse for the internet for that, okay?
Don't we all for pictures?
No, I work
No.
Look at my picture, bro.
Oh, you're just so much more greater that it takes more of an effort to look up pictures on the internet.
You guys are whack. I found
Wait, guys, wait. I just want to listen to this.
See, for me, I wouldn't even. It would be harder because I would have to search up Feast and Ferb, try to figure out who her name was, and then I would have to search up Candace.
So you guys want to hear? Yo, you guys want to hear piano? Want to hear piano? Want to hear piano?
Yeah, I want to hear piano. I want to hear piano.
Watch this. Watch this. Watch this.
Oh god.
I don't really give a fuck if people steal my pictures because I can just go get a new one.
Oh my god.
Goodbye, actually.
Whoever was screaming, I give you an A+.
I'm very mad.
I still can't take that serious. He was actually screaming.
It sounded like pure terror.
Yeah, it sounded like Slipknot. Slipknot's worst album.
Not even. It sounded like a younger, pubescent Slipknot.
Shit, Slipknot?
No, that's way too much.
That's too
No, that
much.
shit literally sounds like a demon.
It is too much, but it's just think about the people around him, not just him.
Shit literally sounds like a
Dude,
demon.
hold on. Let me go wake up my fucking cousin. Well, I'm sure he's already woken up. Be right
You
back.
guys sound like demons, bro. What the fuck?
I'm a demon.
Oh, dude, I can sound like the demon. You want to hear I'm actually Satan? Would you like me to sound like Satan? I mean, I can sound like Satan.
Put your penis away, dude! What are you doing, Stop!
Spooky, huh? Hey.
Hello.
Ookie pumpkin.
Oh my god, sugar, you're hot.
Walking around your patch.
Shut the fuck up. Okay, I hate that.
Hey, Caps, can you like shut the fuck up?
Oh my
No, it's ear rape. I'll do whatever I want.
No, you won't. You won't do whatever what the fuck you want, mate.
You're probably
That's not how this works, mate. You're not in California. You're not in America.
She ran away.
You don't have freedom of speech, bitch.
I choked.
You probably said you're lolly feet.
Hey,
Oh my
stick out
god.
the nice ass.
Hi, friend. Oh, whoa.
Hey,
Hi,
lolly.
sisters.
Hi,
Lolly.
sisters. James Charles here.
Oh my god. She's such a trap. You're trapped.
Trap. You have a 6-foot penis.
You're.
Hey, Soinu.
Uh-huh.
Are you a dude and you have that ass?
I wish.
I don't think I would stop touching myself.
I want to go with that ass.
Hey, Cats.
Yeah.
What's 2 plus 2?
Huh?
What's 2 plus 2?
Like 5?
Oh, you're dumb. Oh, you're dumb. Oh, shit.
I know what 2 plus 3 is.
What's 2 plus 2?
4.
4.
What's minus 3?
Stop talking. Number 15, Burger King foot lettuce.
God damn it.
That means so dead. Shut the fuck up.
Shut up, what's ear rape? I'll do whatever I want.
Whoa.
I'll do whatever I want because I'm a special needs kid.
It's an e-girl.
Yeah, I'm an e-girl.
Don't we all
You sound like a fucking 7-year-old.
Y'all gotta mute
At least someone's speaking the truth.
Yeah. That's right.
Hey, I think we gotta silence women by muting them.
Yes.
Hey,
Go back in the kitchen, make me a sandwich.
back to the 70s. Let's go,
Did
boys.
you just
Let's
say
go.
that? Did you really just hear that?
Oh, she's triggered.
Oh my dude, just do it.
You know what's being thrown around a lot?
What?
The N-word and women.
Oh.
Actually.
Because they're not making the sandwiches.
Imagine being European. Like, holy shit, that's an instant problem.
Okay, fuck you.
What time? Like right now? 10 minutes from now? 30?
You sound like an ASAP Rocky feature.
Wait, me?
Hey, you got it. Hey, you got it. Hey, you got it.
Hey, hey, hey,
Wait, me?
hey,
Wait, me?
hey, hey, hey.
Can I burp on me?
No, not you. We understand you want
No.
attention, but no, not you.
I don't want to fucking get a tetanus shot from you burping them.
Can this
I'm
fucking
joking.
girl shut up?
I'm sorry for being so toxic. It's just that you came off as some bitchy ass European girl, but you probably are. You probably still are.
She still comes out like that.
Nothing changed.
Who hurt
Pissing me off right now, bro. Like, actually.
Your dad hit you?
I'm
Who hurt
not
you?
gonna talk to you ever again.
Oh, roasted, nigga.
I'm being ignored.
Hey, do I get the N-word pass? I'm Mexican.
No!
Are you black? Are you black?
No. I'm pretty dark.
Then no.
Okay, I got you.
Yeah, those are two different. Africa is
bro.
Africa. You're in Mexico. Two different places.
Do you not see the picture of me?
Hey, real question though. Have you guys seen a guy by the name of Hannibal Lecter running around the server?
This nigga's on to me. Hold on, I gotta go.
Oh, really though? Like, deadass. Have you actually seen a guy by that name? That's plus 40% seriousness.
Well, my ass is still live, so.
Oh shit!
What is this? What are these sounds that are entering my eardrums? Okay, you are now deep throating a whole dick.
Hi.
Hi.
Bitch.
What is your favorite type of food?
I don't have a favorite type of food.
What, you know, like Chinese food, Italian food, pizza, sushi?
I mean, yeah, I do like it, but I don't have a favorite.
Is that astronaut?
Houston, do you copy?
Yes, thank you. I need someone like this.
We currently have a hole in our ship. Houston, do you copy?
Yeah, we copy. Let me get into this.
What do you suggest I do about this giant asshole in the ship? It's about the size of a human head.
Do you have any duct tape?
Yeah, I got some duct tape right here, Houston.
Yeah, I just use some duct tape.
You want me to patch it up? Alright. Alright. Alright, Houston. I think it's good to go.
Pressure going back to normal stability.
Currently we're losing oxygen at a much lower pace now, but yes, we're still losing oxygen.
Well, we're doing better than we were 5 seconds ago.
What the?
That is right, Houston.
Okay, what the
Alright,
fuck
whoever
was
did
that,
Houston, leave. Thank you.
Oh,
I don't want you to. Can I sing for you? Can I sing for you?
no.
Okay, I'm gonna sing.
Yeah, no, you should not sing for,
I'm gonna sing. What should I sing?
Frequency is only for,
I'm gonna sing "Let It Go."
Yeah.
Let it go. Let it go. Let it go.
Shut the fuck up right fucking now.
Turn away and slam the door.
I'm gonna change my name to Houston. I'm gonna change my name to Houston. And we're gonna.
Alright, that'd be great. Thank you. I need a Houston.
Hi, sisters.
Houston. Houston.
Yes.
Hi, sister.
You're still a Morning Star.
I currently know that. I'm just gonna change my name to NASA.
I don't want you to.
Alright, you could change your name to NASA. That'll work.
What was that loud sound up on board?
Hi, Owo.
I don't really know. I think there's someone moving furniture around.
X-ray.
I see. No problem, no problem.
Don't know why there's furniture on board the spacecraft. After all, we are on a spacecraft, so it shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah, it should be floating around. Alright, so cabin pressure is stable?
Yeah, actually.
Ooh, I'll be the alien monster in Mars for you. Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
Do you have any guns up there?
Yeah, we got a laser rifle right here, sir.
You're gonna need a lot.
You're right.
Thank you, God. It died.
Yo.
Step bro.
Fortnite.
Will Smith, is that you?
And Marcus Brownlee.
Shut your fat.
Alright. Nick, what did you say to me?
What are we walking into now?
Say that again.
I don't, not sure. Sounds like someone's going through the frequency.
Yeah, I think someone had tapped into our comms.
Well, shit.
I'm currently hacking the Guy Fieri mainframe.
Can you repeat that, sir?
They know our password.
God damn it.
This is not good, sir.
No, not good at all. We can't really do much down here.
Okay, hold on one sec. I sent you a friend request.
Got it.
Alright. We should go to call 4, call 5, call 8.
Call 5.
Alrighty.
the fuck up. You can touch my dick and put it in your ear. I'm elastic, like a bastard. What? Da 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 da. Make it any. You're fantastic. I made a.
Let's see here.
I could see it as well. The light from the back of that unit illuminated an approximately 7-foot tall creature. It looked like it was turned around, but I could not make out a face. Most of it was hairless, but I did see some matted patches of hair here and there on its body. It had extremely long, skinny arms that appeared to drag the ground behind it. The parts of the body that were hairless appeared to be gray and wrinkly. It wasn't moving, just standing there with its back towards us. We decided to radio dispatch and told them to get a police unit to our location as there was a large animal outside of our unit. About 5 minutes later, we saw the lights from the police unit come from down the road. The creature looked in the direction of the lights, turned its body, and very calmly walked into the woods. The officer walked up to our unit and opened the door. We explained to him what was going on. He said that he didn't see anything as he was pulling up, and whatever it was gone now. It's been a few months since seeing this creature, and I've never seen or heard anything like it, and I have not seen it since. Granted, we don't park in that area anymore. Needless to say, we have stayed in the front of the truck now when posting, ready to floor it and drive away if anything like this happens again.
Here in Canada, I have in-laws way up north in a place called the Northwest Territories. They're native and have a lot of weird tales from their community. They have family spread all over the north, a lot of them whom are in Alberta as well, and will play into this story. So, it was a typical winter night, maybe 10-ish years ago at my in-laws' grandparents' house. Not that late or anything, but very dark due to that time of year, and it was way too cold to be outside. At least negative 45 Celsius, or negative 49 degrees. Everyone was just hanging out and watching TV. Kids were playing, and a typical average kind of night, you know? Suddenly, there is knocking at the door. Hard, persistent knocking. This was immediately strange, as they live away outside of any town, with kilometers between neighbors, and unannounced guests are almost unheard of. Their grandparents are visibly concerned and tell them not to answer the door. The knocking became harder, and the guests began to speak, loudly stating that they were Auntie so-and-so and that they had been invited over. The kids wanted to answer the door to see their auntie. Apparently, it sounded exactly like her, so their grandpa had to block the kids from going near the door and tell them to get away from the door and the windows as well. The knocking became into pounding, and the guest started yelling and screaming angrily to be let in. Eventually, it stopped and the guest was gone. The next morning, there were no tracks outside in the snow, and no signs of a vehicle had been in the area. This auntie lived in Alberta and had made no plans to visit. Anyway, that's about it. Not much for excitement, but that kind of shit is weirdly common out here in some places. Believe it or not, Wendigo is a major piece of folklore in that family as well, and they refuse to talk about it out of fear of drawing one in. I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona. Many times when you would ask natives about skinwalkers, they would get upset and would mostly refuse to even mention the word. My aunt went to a basketball game with the team my uncle was training. She stepped in since he was out sick. The game was on a reservation, and they were on a dirt road heading home around 8 at night, and she said an old woman started floating next to the van, and everyone started to scream. She told everyone in the car to pray, and she said that's when the old woman floated off into the dark. Nobody stopped praying until they got to the meeting line where she dropped off the kids. Another story was from my friend Raiden. He told me that they were at his grandma's house watching TV at night when he heard knocking on the door. He went to go answer it and his grandparents yelled at him not to, saying that nobody comes out this late except for skinwalkers. He said after that, they heard knocking on the walls and windows, and the windows had boards that you could shut from the inside, so he never saw anything. He said the next day, he heard the walker get on top of their trailer outside and started thumping on it. Next day they came out, the roof was dented to hell. My friend Anthony told me a story of how him and his brothers were outside with their uncle, and they saw a skinwalker with blood-red eyes and pale white skin, but the face looked like a pig's. They said they sat there frozen, and they said that their uncle also froze in a spot after making direct eye contact with the walker, and the walker started walking towards them, and they said that they grabbed their uncle and dragged him inside and locked everything and called the cops. Some pretty terrifying shit. I wouldn't go searching for any of these things. It was around 11 p.m. at night. We wanted to visit a graveyard, so we ended up going to Double Butte Cemetery near South Mountain in Phoenix. As we were pulling in, a coyote dashed across the car and ran toward the mountains. It looked weird, like one of those overbred, incest German shepherds that are all short and hunched over. But I didn't think too much of it. We parked and walked away from the car and explored the graveyard. There were no sign of people or coyotes, but whenever we walked near a bush or a tree, we heard rustling. But we figured it was just some sort of rodent or bat. When we were done, we walked toward the car to leave, but we saw a cool little gated sanctuary garden type thing. So we went in there and sat for a little. All of a sudden, we heard what sounded like a weird mix of a laugh, scream, and a howl. I was confused to what this humanist scream was at first, so my mind immediately translated it to multiple coyotes. A pack. We were about to leave, and then we saw 4 sets of glowing eyes, crouching and coming toward us. Fast. I still figured an angry coyote pack, so we ran to the car. After being safe in the car, we got a little more ballsy and tried to find them. They were nowhere to be seen. I saw 3, maybe 4 shadows of human figures on the other side of the graveyard from the car. I thought to myself, wow, there are people here this late? I wonder why we didn't see or hear them. It's a pretty small, flat and treeless graveyard. Basically, just dirt and desert. so I'm pretty positive we would have known if there were others. Their shadows disappear for a while, but I'm still looking toward that direction. That's when I saw the weirdest figure, hunched over, walking in the most awkward way. The way its body moved was swift and unnatural. It was the same direction where I saw the people. We drove over to that direction and found nothing and left. We get home and we noticed the car scratched up everywhere, like a coyote was going crazy on top of the car. The scratches were long and dragged, in different directions, and a few dirt paw prints all over the car. We had a car wash the next day, and the car was completely untouched before, and I'm pretty sure of that. We also left a McFlurry in the trunk of the car, which was untouched and not moved. If coyotes got on the car, it definitely would have been destroyed, considered how dramatic the scratches were. So yeah, I'm wondering if what we saw were skinwalkers. The graveyard is also near a reservation, and it seemed like a lot of Arizona pioneers and natives were buried there. First off, I'd like to let you know it's taboo to speak of them, or the others as it brings them after you. That said, here's my story. It was 25 years ago. I lived on the reservation with my family, and I was out with some friends. We went down to the creek to have a day of reed picking, and we were enjoying listening to the sounds of nature. I couldn't resist trying to catch a little frog I saw. I reached out to catch it, and it hopped away. Well, as I was expecting that, I started back a bit, and I fell forward and landed against a small boulder and sprained my ankle. I tried to get up, and I couldn't because my foot had swelled up really bad. I couldn't even take off my shoe or sock at this point. My friends came over to sit with me and figure out how we were going to get back to the adobe. There were 7 of us, and we were all too scared to walk back alone due to our parents always telling us never to leave each other at all costs. We were trying to think what to do when we were at a loss. We went silent for a while, and that's when we all noticed that the animals around us were quiet as well. We all thought nothing of it, and continued to think about the life and how we were going to get back to the adobe. I was apologizing for the 100th time when we heard a noise. I jumped and screamed out in pain. My friend, she grabbed my arm and told me to put my weight on her shoulders, and then another friend joined her. I'm between 2 of my friends limping along the pathway when we hear another noise, kind of like a fire popping noise, and yet no fire around for half a mile. Well, we stopped and we listened, and then a smell so bad and nauseating overcame us. I'm not even sure how to say how it smelled. It was kind of dead and rotted, like a fresh metallic smell mixed in with a little bit of garbage. What I'd say, this was definitely puzzling, as it wasn't no Bigfoot or anything like that. There was no wildlife we knew that smelled like that either. We were scared, and honestly, really freaked out. We decided my friend Scotty was going to investigate and find out what was causing the smell. We were fixating and arguing with him because we didn't want him to go. The smell became so strong, we all vomited, and we couldn't breathe without an overwhelming, disgusting, nauseous feeling overwhelming us. You may think I'm nuts, and at this point I wouldn't blame you, but I'm telling you this right now. This is the God's honest truth. When I was able to stop the nausea and vomiting, I looked up from between my friend's shoulders and saw the most horrifying thing I have ever seen in my life. Right on a hill in front of us, about 1.5 yards away, stood a skinwalker. He was starting towards us and making hardly any sound at all. We'd been warned about them and we knew we were going to have to get away from here. I decided, pain or not, I was going to just suck it up and run as best as I could. I wasn't going to let my friends go down because of me. I let go of their shoulders. I took a deep breath and I started to run as fast as I could. I really don't know how or why, but I was too focused on the running from him. But I barely felt my ankle at this point. We were all at a dead run down the path across the fields and finally reached the adobe. We all ran in, gasping for breath, and my mom and my friends' moms looked at us asking what had happened to us. We were so freaked out and running, as the hounds had been after us. Well, Sarah caught her breath first and started to ramble on about what had happened. I started calming down and collapsed and cringed from my sprained ankle. My mom came over with Mary Ann, my cousin's sister-in-law, and both started to work on my ankle. I got chided for being clumsy and trying to mess with wildlife. I was so badly in pain I wanted to scream. I asked if I could have some water, and my mom gave me a little bit. She told me to drink slowly as I get sick if I drink too fast. My sister and brothers came in, and we were told to go get healing herbs from the shaman. I was passing in and out of awareness, and I could barely hear bits and pieces of my friends telling their stories about our ordeal. I must have passed out, since when I woke up I was in my bed and my mom was sitting in a corner, churning bread to cook for dinner. She immediately came to my bedside and said the shaman had been here to see me, and he said I'll be fine. We all should be okay. He didn't think we were affected by the bad spirits, but we need to follow orders in order to stay safe from now, as he thinks it may be a warning to us. I still wonder to this day who he was and why he was warning us and about what. I will never know, but I since then have moved and grown up. But I never have and never will mess with wildlife for any reason unless it's to save a life. I'll just watch it from a distance and enjoy its beauty. I'm not in any hurry to be punished by the evil spirits for doing evil things. I prefer to be an okay person and to just worship our great spirits, our creator. You may not believe me, but I will tell you this one. Don't speak about them, and don't let them possess you or kill you. Never in my life could I predict something like this would ever happen to me. You're probably wondering if I experienced a traumatic event such as a mugging, home invasion, car accident, or probably that I received shocking news from my doctor that I have some sort of cancer. Honestly, I would have preferred any of those events compared to the horror that I recently faced. Before I go any further, understand that I'm not crazy, nor am I under the influence of any mind-altering drugs. No one around me believed anything that happened, nor what I saw that night, so my words are all I have as I give my recollection within this story. Cindy was an extraordinary girl, beautiful as a rose, and always kind-hearted since the day she moved in next door. We met when we were both kids, and she would often come visit me to play and hang out, or vice versa. Both my parents and hers would become close. The more Cindy and I's friendship grew, that was. By our mid-teens, we were officially a couple, a perfect match. After high school, we both went to different colleges, but our bond and love for each other was still strong despite the distance between us. What I saw that night. Now, in our 20s, I was offered the job that I've been desperately yearning for in Los Angeles. Since we lived in New Mexico, I obviously had to relocate. Although I had my own place, Cindy was still living with her parents at the time while working at a daycare. The last thing I wanted to do was disrupt her future career plans, but I loved her way too much to be away from her. So I asked her to come with me. Despite this being the first time she'd be away from her home and her parents, she willingly agreed. We were officially a couple, a perfect match. I decided to first take a trip out to California to meet my new boss and, more importantly, find a new apartment within the city closer to work before I officially moved there. Now, both Cindy and I chose to make a vacation out of it and a road trip out west. We left early that morning, hoping to reach our destination within a couple of days. Everything had a joyous feel about it. We were both excited and overall happy about starting our new lives. The morning had soon turned to evening. As we crossed the state line into Arizona and made our way through the more deserted and rural areas. It was nearing the end of the day as dusk finally set in. We were the only people, or so it seemed, driving down the highway with the vast desert and darkness surrounding us. I could only see as far as my headlights would allow, when suddenly, a huge dog stepped onto the road. I swerved the car just in time to avoid hitting the animal before stopping. With the abrupt stop, I accidentally sprained my wrist against the steering wheel. However, that wasn't the odd thing about it. The dog, which caused us to steer off the road, calmly made its way in front of the car once more. Its eyes glared in the headlights as it stared undisturbed at us. Both Cindy and I were lost for words as we could do nothing but stare back in utter surprise. This encounter lasted less than a minute before the dog bared its teeth in a low grumble before turning its back to us and darting off into the darkness. Needless to say, this was beyond the doubt the weirdest thing that I had experienced thus far. Rather than dwelling on the incident, I glanced over at Cindy to tell her that she'd have to drive the... With the abrupt stop, I accidentally sprained my wrist against the steering wheel. However, that wasn't the odd thing about it. The dog, which caused us to steer off the road, calmly made its way in front of the car once more. Its eyes glared in the headlights as it stared undisturbed at us. Both Cindy and I were lost for words as we could do nothing but stare back in utter surprise. This encounter lasted less than a minute before the dog bared its teeth in a low grumble before turning its back to us and darting off into the darkness. Needless to say, this was beyond a doubt the weirdest thing that I had experienced thus far. Rather than dwelling on the incident, I glanced over at Cindy to tell her that she'd have to drive the road. With the abrupt stop, I accidentally...
Like fat girl?
Yeah.
Oh, I like fat women. How fat are you?
I'm not fat.
Oh, what the f? Are you some skinny ass bitch?
Sure.
What? Yeah. And you like get like 500 pounds real quick? Can you do this for me?
Give me money, I will.
Yeah, I will give you money to eat everything you find. Everything. Like sweets, cakes, dogs. No. I mean sweets. Yeah, not dogs.
I can't eat dogs. I don't want to eat.
Okay, you know what? Yes, I eat dogs, but it's not nice. You shouldn't do that.
You eat it then.
I do a lot of things I shouldn't. Okay, let's start from there. But dogs, especially when they are alive and you like cut the leg, you cut the fucking leg and you eat it in front of him, and he's watching. He can't do anything. Some dogs even lick you while you eat their leg. You know.
Specifically, male dogs, you do this.
I do it to everyone, even female dogs. Actually, you know what? Female dogs are better because sometimes they have period and you drink the period.
What the fuck?
So, like, can you be very fat, like extremely fat, where you can't even walk because of your fatness? Can you do this for me, please? I fucking love you. You're the woman I was looking for. I'm gonna take a picture before, now that you're skinny, and after, where you will be a fat fucking bitch. Wait, come here, come here. I'm gonna make you proud of your new body. You know, actually, I
appreciate that.
I am lean, so I won't be able to move you around.
Why are you talking about? Why are you talking like that, God?
But
why are you talking like that?
Stop, okay? Stop. It's not nice.
Why are you talking like
Wait, what did I just do?
You laughed before I could ask you something.
No, bitch, don't ask me. My fish got bronchitis again, okay? I gotta go.
No!
Fuck! She uses that excuse every time.
Oh my god, I want a very fat bitch for me.
What?
I want to fuck a very fat bitch. Very fat, like extremely fat. I want her to smell like shit. I want her to sit on her pants because she's so fat she can't move to the toilet. Yeah, bro. I want to touch her pussy, but I need to find it because they're so fat everywhere around, you know? I need to search for her pussy. Like, bro.
How's it going?
Hey, man.
How's it going, man?
Just a normal day. I'm talking about my sexual desires, you know?
And what are those? I mean, everyone for their own, right?
You want to know my sexual desires?
No. I mean, if you're sharing.
Fucking come at me, bro.
Yeah, I like extremely fat bitches, extremely fat.
You like, okay, well, that's fair enough. Everyone for their own.
Yeah, extremely fat. Like, I need to search for her pussy because of the fatness everywhere. You know,
Yeah.
It's like I need to fight for it. You know, take the belly out, take all the fat out, so I find her pussy. Like, search for fucking war. I want a fucking war. Okay, I'm just joking. By the way, I'm a normal person.
I like how you have to clarify that.
Yeah, I just think about all this.
You know, that's Sebastian kids wear. Oh, shit. Where did Minjay go?
One sec, darling.
Oh. Pardon?
What did you say to me, shit?
Oh, I said, what's up?
What the fuck did you say to me?
I said, what's up, bitch?
You don't miss it, I guess I never miss, huh? You got a boyfriend, I bet he doesn't kiss ya. Mwah, you go find another girl, we gon' miss ya. He goes Kurt, did the love is Khalifa.
What?
I actually like that.
Okay.
Okay, let me find Minjay.
I need someone to motivate me to cut my penis.
You can do it. Just believe in yourself.
911, what's your emergency?
That's nice. Question: is anybody in a cult here?
Yeah, me.
No.
It's wonderful.
911, what's your emergency? Are you have emergency? Bro, are you have emergency? Why you call 911 if you not have emergency? Fucking stupid idiot.
Shit. Okay, I'm gonna go find Minja.
Rest of the way as my wrist was aching from the sprain. We pulled into a gas station off the lonely highway to get some supplies and bandages to tie my wrist. Cindy went into the rest stop while I pumped the gas. As I was waiting for Cindy to fill the tank, out of nowhere, I heard the faintest grumbling sound. I peered around but saw nothing but the dark that engulfed the desert. I peered into the rest stop to see Cindy now making a purchase from the attendant when the grumble started again. I quickly turned around, and out in the distance, not 50 feet away, I spotted the very same large dog. However, it took off not 2 seconds after it somehow realized I saw it. This was indeed freaky, considering we were at least 2 to 3 miles from any point in the highway in which this incident occurred. In no way could a dog cover that distance in such a short amount of time. I tried to convince myself that what I saw was just a mere coincidence, but eerie nonetheless. I ushered Cindy to hurry up, without raising concern, as I didn't want to freak her out. Seeing as it was already late and my wrist was aching with pain, I decided that we should just call it a day and hit the road again in the morning. There was a motel less than a mile away from the gas station of which we decided to bunk down for the night. With there being a few occupancies, we were able to get a reasonable-sized room as I helped Cindy unload our luggage from the car, all the while still not mentioning the strange occurrence. As we settled in, I was able to scrounge up some ice from the motel's dispenser to try and decrease the swelling of my wrist. As I lay on the bed and tried to relax, Cindy kept rifling through her handbag in concern. As it so happened, she had forgotten her credit card back at the gas station. She was adamant about going back and getting it, as she was convinced that it might have slipped out of her purse as she rushed out of the store. She was a little worried and concerned, so I opted to go back to the gas station and see if I could find it for her, but she chose to go herself as I was in no condition to drive. I tried to convince her that I was capable of driving regardless of my hand, but she insisted. I also offered to go with her, seeing as it was late and all the weird occurrences that had happened thus far, but my efforts were futile once more. The gas station was less than a mile away and visible from our motel, so I knew Cindy wouldn't be gone long. Finally, easing the pain in my wrist with some ice, I accidentally dozed off while watching TV. When I awoke, however, it was an hour later and Cindy had not returned yet nor called. I tried reaching her, but it would continuously ring without an answer. After calling her a couple more times, but to no avail, I went over to the front desk to check with the night manager as to whether he had seen Cindy since we checked in together. Apart from seeing her leave the parking lot an hour earlier, he assured me that he hadn't seen her return. My worry soon transitioned into fear. Although the manager offered to call the police, I told him that I'd check the gas station to see if I could find her there before we alert the authorities. Cell phone usage is not permitted around the vicinity of gas pumps, so there was a possible reason she wasn't answering. I chose to walk over to the station, since it was under a mile, which would approximately take me 15 to 20 minutes if I hurried. Reluctantly, I began to trek down the dark highway, guiding my path with the use of my flashlight. I tried desperately to stay positive, conceiving every possible excuse in my mind as to why Cindy had been absent for so long. The further along I went, I came across tire marks on the road as if a car had veered off the highway. Using my flashlight, I followed the irregular tracks just a few feet ahead until it trailed off the road. As I shone my light out into the darkness, off the side where the tracks led, my worst fear suddenly materialized. I saw the tail end of my car, at least 30 feet off the road. I immediately ran up to see if Cindy was inside, God forbid, badly injured due to the accident. As I came up to the driver's side of the car, It was evident that it was empty. I frantically looked around and yelled for Cindy a couple of times. As I circled the vehicle, I noticed the keys were still in the ignition. The front windshield was smashed, and the front tire was flat, but no signs of actual collision. The only other major damage to the car was a huge dent on the hood, as if someone had dropped an anvil on it. I scrambled to dial 911 on my phone, but for some strange reason, I chose to call Cindy one last time. As her phone kept ringing, I constantly was on the lookout for any cars passing by. I tried calling again, but as I was frantically looking around, a faint light caught my attention at least 20 feet from the car. I hastily approached the object on the desert floor, and as the light in question came into recognition, I realized it was Cindy's phone which I had been calling. I dropped to my knees and picked it up, thinking the worst as my eyes swelled up with tears. In my brief moment of grief, I heard someone call my name further out in the distance. I stood back up and tried to listen closely as, this time, I heard my name called again. The voice became clearer as whoever was saying it was becoming closer. Focusing my eyes, I could see a figure in the distance closing in. I called out to it, but when the reply came, I realized it was Cindy's voice. I bolted toward her, feeling a sigh of relief. I pointed my flashlight at the figure and began to slow my pace, noticing Cindy walking toward me in a weird way. One of her legs was dragging as she propelled herself with the other, whilst one of her arms was waving at me in a kind of strange manner. At first, I thought she was hurt from the accident, but the closer I got, the more fearful I became. Something didn't seem right about her as I stopped in my tracks and watched as she extended her arm toward me and began tilting her head from side to side. Whatever this thing only feet away from me was, it sure as hell wasn't my girlfriend. The being that appeared as Cindy kept calling my name as it moved in closer and closer. Its body began contorting in weird positions as trying to act more human. That didn't catch my attention more so than whatever it was. It also wore Cindy's clothes, it looked like, except they were inside out. I slowly began to back away, keeping my light on it. I can only speculate that it somehow became aware that I realized it wasn't who it was pretending to be, as its eyes glared a bright red, and the grumbling sound of a wild dog escaped its mouth. The gas station wasn't too far up the highway, but if I were to make it, I'd have to run like hell. Before I could even plan my escape, the thing dropped to the ground on all fours, as its body began to contort more rapidly, and I even heard its limbs snap. I took that as my cue to run. The moment as I back onto the highway, I bolted toward the gas station in full speed. I could hear the creature give off a blood-curdling cry from where I left it, a cry between that of a woman's scream and the howl of a wolf. I ran as fast as my feet would carry me, all whilst the cries echoed in the dark. For a moment, I could hear the faint panting of a wild dog giving chase almost parallel to the road alongside me. Whether it was chasing me or not, I was just a few short feet away from the gas station. There were no cars at any of the pumps as I hurried into the gas station store so frantically that I tripped onto the floor the moment I burst through the doors. The attendee rushed over to me to see if I was alright, but I was more focused on whether that creature had followed. It glared at the outside and its surroundings as I stood to my feet drenched in sweat and breathing heavily. The attendee kept trying to get my attention and asking me if everything was okay, but I didn't even acknowledge him until I realized that there was no sign of that thing anywhere. I stepped outside briefly only to hear the still silence and the occasional rustling of the desert wind. Finally, directing my attention to the gas station attendee, I immediately asked him as to whether he had seen my girlfriend return. I tried explaining that she was missing as well as being chased by some weird creature on my way here. He asked her name, but when I told him, he froze for a moment, then reached behind the counter drawer and pulled out Cindy's credit card. The same card she was supposed to return for after he handed it to me. the realization that something horrible had happened to my girlfriend settled in. I ushered him to call the police, whom arrived at the gas station about 15 minutes later. I recounted everything that happened to the police except for my encounter with whatever that creature was. How could I possibly explain what I saw and not be thought of as a mental case? I was shaken to my core, but had to remain sane for the sake of finding the real Cindy. I led the police to the site of the car wreck in the motel where the rest of Cindy's belongings were. The cops launched a full search and investigation of the sudden disappearance, while I was taken in for questioning that very night as being labeled the only suspect. Video surveillance at both locations revealed the time when Cindy left the motel, but never arrived at the gas station. Since I refused to recount my encounter with the fake Cindy, all fingers pointed towards me as the primary suspect, though I was ultimately released from the precinct due to lack of compelling evidence that implicated me with her disappearance. I still felt like the guilty one, though. Had I stopped her from leaving the motel room that night, Cindy would still be here. After some time, the search officially concluded, and Cindy's name was added to the state's list of missing persons. Her parents still cling to the hope that their daughter is missing rather than dead, even months after the incident. I'm a 23-year-old woman, and I'm half Cherokee, from Georgia. At the time that this story took place, my fiancé and I were living on a large farm in Maryland. We didn't use the farm, but we were renting a small house on the property, and were free to come and go around the grounds. I was only 19 at the time that this took place, and the only other residents in our home were myself, my fiancé, and our cat and dog. Our cat was a lunatic barn cat that I'd rescued because I can't say no to animals that need help, and our dog was my loyal pit bull, who was a sweet, cuddly, scaredy cat. She weighed about 75 pounds and scared of her own shadow. Our farm was situated on about 20 acres of land, and our driveway was about a half a mile long. So usually, when I would get home from work, my loyal dog and I would go for a walk, and usually I brought my fiancé with me. Not that I was afraid to go out alone, just that he spends too much time playing games and all. I like him using his legs. After our driveway was a 12-mile-long road through the woods and farms until it finally reconnected with civilization, so it was safe to say we were far from other people, except for our landlord, of course. The rest of it were miles of wheat fields and solid forest for 2 more miles. Now that you have a bit of layout, on to the really creepy bit. So, it started off like any other weekday evening. My fiancé and I returned home from work to our happy cottage and happy pets. Harley, our dog, was frantic to go out for a walk, so I quieted her and changed her into her walking clothes, and I asked if my fiancé wanted to come with me. He had gotten home shortly after me, and said he had seen one of the coyotes that we have had around close to the field by our house. As you may know, coyotes are mostly scavengers, especially out here on the East Coast, so I wasn't too worried, and I am very capable of defending myself. I caught him a puss, and then told Harley that we could go, and that we would be fine without him. Laughing to myself, we left the cottage and started walking toward the driveway. The sun was going down, and the October air had started to get a chill to it, and it rustled through the cornfields next to our long driveway. The corn was about 6 feet tall at this point in the year, and impossible to see through, so I assumed that my fiancé was just trying to scare me because there was no way he could have seen a coyote in this field. Harley was enjoying her time in the field, tearing in and out of the corn stalks. On our way up to the driveway, I knew that was as big of a coward as she was, that she would alert me if there was any danger coming, and she would very quickly run away. By the time I reached the end of the driveway, the sun had set and the moon, which had already come out, was shining high about the fields. It wasn't quite full, but it provided enough light that I didn't need to use my flashlight or Harley's collar light. We turned left down the road and proceeded across the first section of the field. The first field was soybeans. If you don't know, they are relatively short plants that nothing but a rabbit could hide in. And off in the distance, I spotted a few deer, but nothing alarming, so we relaxed and enjoyed our walk through the night air. I threw a stick at Harley, and she brought it back. We do this over and over again, the typical dog and owner stuff. We reached the first small section of trees, and Harley stopped and bumped into my leg, letting me know there was something ahead. It wasn't a coyote or a deer, but there was a rabbit that had been hit by a passing car and was still struggling. As much as I hate to say this, there was no way it was going to live, and honestly, it's probably what drew the coyote pack in. I knelt down by it, using my knife quickly and put it out of its misery, as my family had taught me, and let it pass into my next life. Feeling sad, but somewhat relieved that all we had encountered was a handful of deer and that poor rabbit, we continued our walk and passed into the next field. This was a wheat field, and the wheat was about ready for harvest, so it was quite tall and hard to see through. The field was quiet though, and Harley didn't do anything, so I figured that the coyotes had passed on if there had been any at all. Now this is the part that you have been waiting for, and I don't know what it was, but here it is. We rounded the corner of the field and into an area with wheat on our left and the forest on our right, and the air seemed to go still. Harley got closer to me, and I heard rustling in the wheat field. I saw 3 tails circling back towards the forest. Coyotes. The eastern coyotes are small, but in a pack, they get pretty ballsy. Harley raised her heckles, and I yelled, "Get out of here! Go on! Fuck off!" as loud as I could at the coyotes. They started scattering off into the trees. I decided to turn around and get out of there before they decided to regroup, because I am brave, but I'm not going to walk into a darkened forest with a coyote pack and a cowardly pit bull. We turned to head back, and again I heard a rustling in the wheat. A confused coyote, maybe. I thought that it must be, but no. Harley was standing stock still staring at the wheat, and I whistled for her to come to me. That high-pitched, ear-piercing, 2-finger whistle. That snapped her out of it for a second, when my whistle was returned from the inside of the wheat. All of a sudden, all of the family legend I had heard came flooding back to me, and I expected to see a tall, thin creature emerge, but nothing did. I didn't smell rotting meat or feel a sense of dread. Instead, I was transfixed with fear and curiosity. I whistled again. The whistle was returned again. Very human sounding, but at the same time, not. Against my better judgment, I said, "Hello?" My own voice replied, "Hello?" My hand on my knife, I said, "Show yourself." Silence. No bugs, no coyotes, no Harley noises, just my own breath. Slowly, the rustling started again, and I turned on my flashlight. I shined it on the wheat field, and what I saw confuses me to this day. Animal eyes, that green-yellow reflection of light, was cast back at me, but what it was connected to didn't make sense. There was a girl, no more than 14 or 16, crouched in the wheat. She wore what I think must have been some kind of deerskin or fur, and she was naked otherwise. She was very thin, and looked as though her skin had never seen sunlight. Her hair was long and tangled with wheaten leaves. Under any circumstances, I would have said she was beautiful, but at that moment, she was terrifying. We stared at each other for what must have been a solid minute or so, but felt like much longer, until I heard the unmistakable coyote howl from the forest. Both our heads snapped toward the noise, and I immediately heard her take off through the wheat toward the sound. At that same moment, Harley took off toward our house, and I went after her. We didn't stop running until we got to the driveway, and I stopped not wanting my fiancé to know I was running away from something. I could still hear the howling in the distance, and we started walking at a brisk pace. We made it back to the cottage with no further problems, and didn't tell my fiancé about it, as to not want him to think that I was crazy. She hadn't hurt me, so I didn't think it was right to hunt her. I was awoken in the middle of the night by the sound of coyotes outside our cottage. This wasn't unusual, but now I wondered if she was with them. When I was coming home from work about a month later, I had stopped obsessing about that night, and I almost thought I had imagined it when I slammed on my brakes for something in the road. It was dark, and my headlights hit its eyes and reflected green and yellow. It was a large coyote. It just stared at my car for a moment and then ran off into the woods. I know this sounds crazy, but I still wonder if that was her. I live in the Pacific Northwest, and I've always been an outdoors kind of guy. I love to camp and hike and spend most of my time outside. Now, I'm not oblivious. I know to take precautions such as carrying a knife and letting someone know where I'm going. Usually, I'll go with my Bernese mountain dog, but on this occasion, I was with friends. I heard of Wendigos and all of that before, but I had not ever seen anything out of the ordinary, so I assumed they were just that. Stories. Me and my friends would joke about it sometimes. The Wendigo is going to get you. But I never talked about it when going into the woods. My friends and I decided to go on a trip deep in the woods. I don't like to go to campgrounds, so that way we can really be out there. For the sake of names, it was me, my friend Anthony, and Victor. Nothing out of the ordinary occurred, although as we drove as far as we could into the woods and hiked onto the trail for about another 2 miles. As we hiked, I sensed something was off. I shook the feeling off as maybe an animal was around. I'm sometimes sensitive to energies. As we settled at our campground, Victor and I were taking pictures of the scenery, and Anthony, of course, was helping himself to his 12-pack of beer. I know, alcoholic or not. Anyways, as the night carried on, Anthony began ranting about some girl who broke his heart and getting all into his feelings, and I tried to change the subject by telling some scary camping stories. In the middle of a story, we heard some branches crack nearby, and I got silent. I do this to see if it's an animal like a bear. Victor then said, "Maybe we should try to make some noises to scare it off." And Anthony, 6 beards in, begins loudly saying, "Bro, it's probably the Wendigo. Hey Wendigo, come get me, drink bitch." I reply, "Anthony, are you one of those guys that just does stupid shit like this? Calm down, dude, we're probably on native land at this point." The national forest we were on was a borderline of a reservation. Anthony said that he was gonna fuck shit up if he saw it, and talking nonsense like that. Fast forward, me and Anthony are just by the fire, while Victor was in the tent getting ready to go to sleep. As me and Anthony talk about his ex-girlfriend problems, he tells me he has to take a piss. So I go with him to make sure he doesn't fall or something. He had too many shots to even walk right. And as I'm waiting for him to finish, I hear Victor's voice, but it sounded different. "Anthony, help me." It repeats this 2 more times, the exact same tone as if it was robotic. At this moment, I knew it was either Victor or something else. Again, I am aware of native folklore, and I know not to risk answering to whatever was calling us. I tell Anthony, "Did you hear that?" Anthony asked me, "What?" "Nothing. I don't know." I wait a few more seconds, and nothing happens. Now, I took this as me being paranoid. I did smoke a little bit of weed, so maybe I was just psyching myself out. When we got back, Victor was outside by the fire telling us he can't sleep. Now keep in mind, we are in a field of grass by the tree line. I thought it was a cool spot to see the stars at night. As we talked, I saw something in the corner of my eye. A deer. I remember seeing one before finding the clearing and thought maybe it was the same one as before. Guess we had a friend following us. Well, I soon found out it was no friend. My friends saw me looking at the deer doing his thing in the field eating grass. Me looking back at my friends, guess we have a visitor. Victor said, a Wendigo, laughing. And of course Anthony says, I swear if that's one, I'm killing it. And he starts screaming at it again. Anthony, leave the freaking deer alone. At this point, we aren't paying attention to the deer and are just talking face to face by the fire when I glanced back and the deer was gone. Like, not gone from the spot, but vanished. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but then Anthony gets up and shouts, Wendigo! And as soon as he says it, I see the deer peeking behind a tree. As I make eye contact with it, it opens its mouth and speaks. It said, in the most inhuman, distorted voice I had ever heard, Anthony, help me. I froze. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. My friends noticed this and turned around to face the deer, which was standing on 2 legs and about 8 feet tall. Its mouth opened more, revealing sharp teeth, and it screams in this maniacal laughter. We took off into the woods, not even caring about our campsite. Thankfully, we were right by the trail that we took to get there, and as I'm running faster than I ever have before, I turn to see that this thing is following us, saying, Anthony, come here. In a demonic voice. We split up to make this thing lose us somehow, and by some stroke of luck I found somewhere to hide under a huge fallen tree and crawled into it with Victor. As we sit there staying quiet as we possibly can, we hear heavy footsteps and heavy breathing. Then luckily, it continued on. After what felt like an eternity, we got out and desperately hoped that Anthony was still around. We decided to head to the truck, and thank God Anthony was there, locked inside it. We got in and got the hell out of there, but before we took off we heard the most haunting scream that echoed across the room. Safe to say, I'm never taking him camping again, and I don't think he wants to go after that experience. I uploaded a story in January and sent it to you about a possible Wendigo lurking around my house. I'm sending this to you again because it has reappeared, and I'm not sure if it's alone. This happened around April 10th. The sun was just beginning to rise, and I was walking around the property checking on all the pigs like usual. Most of them were lazing about in the hay, but I noticed as I slowly made my way out back, the pigs that were restless and making noises, letting you all know now that I had a machete that I shoved in my belt at the time. That was because of an increasing issue with coyotes, as well as the paranoia from my encounter a few months prior. Wondering what the problem was, I crept as quietly as I could out back, my hand hovering over the machete's handle as I did so. Peering over the crest of the hill, I'm greeted with nothing but agitated pigs pacing in their pens. I grunted, standing up straight and making my way up to the pens. What's wrong, Latte? I asked one of the pigs, scratching her head for comfort. She kept turning her head to look at the woods, making loud squeaks and whines in the process. Looking at some of the younger pigs, I noticed that they were doing the same thing. Despite feeling nervous, it was my job to see what was bothering them. So, swallowing hard, I make my way to the tree line, peering into the woods. As I'm looking around, I hear a branch break off to my right, my head whipping around to face the sound. Practically crawling up a steep, muddy ledge was what looked like the creature from before, except its pale skin was stained with what looked like blood, and it looked like it had been in a fight. One of its antlers were snapped in half, and patches of its fur and skin were hanging off of it. I must have made some sort of sound, because its head turned to face me, its gazes locked into mine. The only few seconds that I got to stare at this thing felt like an eternity, before it screamed at me and scuttled up the ledge as fast as it could, disappearing over the top. As soon as I couldn't see it, I hightailed it back to the house, slamming the door shut and locking it. If it was the same creature as before, I want to know what could have done that to it. At the same time, I don't. Frankly, it terrifies me to think that there might be something else out there. Something with enough strength and guts to attack something like that. Just hoping I'm overreacting and it was hit by a vehicle and not attacked by something else. Back about 10 years or so ago, my good friend and I would occasionally take trips to her family's property out in the middle of nowhere. It was fairly remote. You'd had to drive up a dirt road a few miles and couldn't access it unless you had a key to the chain on the gate. There wasn't anyone around for miles. All that was there was a trailer they had towed up and left to sleep in. The feel out there was always a little off. One day, we were wandering around the property, not really thinking of much until about 20 minutes later when we realized we had actually been walking out into the middle of nowhere. We had no water with us and had no clue where we were. Luckily, we found our way back after a while, but neither of us could explain why we did that. I'd also take my voice recorder, and we caught quite a few strange things on it. One day, before heading out there, we were talking about Skinwalker Ranch. It was only about a 40-minute drive from the property, so we thought, hey, why don't we go try to find it? We thought it would be cool to say that we had been there. After searching the internet, we found fairly good directions there and headed out for the night. We had a bit of trouble locating it, but after a bit of driving around, we pulled into an area that was spot on from the descriptions we had read. We stepped out of the car, and the first thing we noticed was the mass amounts of bugs swarming us. Only a few short seconds later, we had huge dogs barking, growling, and running at us. We immediately jumped back in the car and took off. We ended up staying in the area for a little longer exploring. Later that night, back at her property, we were sitting around the fire talking. All of a sudden, we started hearing barking. It was rather startling, and she immediately froze and said she had never heard barking in this area before. She isn't one to get scared easily, so her uneasiness put me on the edge. Not too long after that, there was more barking. Very slowly, we were being surrounded by what I assumed were coyotes. We both tried yelling, jumping around and throwing rocks, but that didn't seem to do any good. Never seen coyotes act this way. We were terrified and had no clue what to do. Not really wanting to stick around and find out if they'd get any closer to us, we doused the fire and flipped on our flashlights. She grabbed my hand and we booked it back into the trailer. We were both shaking by the time we made it in, and she locked the door. I don't think either of us slept that well. I heard a lot of weird sounds and felt the sense of dread the entire night. As soon as the sun started to rise, we decided to pack up and get out of there. We needed a car, and what we saw sent chills down my spine. On the driver's side car window was a huge handprint made with mud. It was easily twice the size of our hands. We looked at each other and silently agreed that we need to get the hell out of there. I'm not saying it was a skinwalker, but neither of us have been able to explain it, and I've never been back. Some background. I live in a rural county in Texas. I live in a rural suburb about 1.5 miles away from my grandparents, who live on an expansive longhorn cattle ranch. My grandparents are currently on a trip to Michigan, and they needed someone to watch their house, take care of their diabetic dog, and water the garden for a while. I love being alone and in the country, and I wouldn't be that far from my mom and stepdad, so I agreed to do it for them. The first 2 days were fine. It was on the third day that this began. It was about 8:30 at night. I had just made myself dinner, a Lunchable, and was ready to sit down in the living room and watch TV for a couple of hours until I went to bed. The recliner I was sat in at my grandparents' living room was directly beside their large glass doors, and I could see into their backyard and into their ranch from my seat. Just past the fence of the backyard were about a dozen deer, which wasn't odd considering there's an insane amount of deer where I live. I watched them for a second, when all of a sudden I felt a wave of fear rush over me. It was like my brain stopped seeing the deer as something harmless, and instead, it became a very imposing sight. I scanned over the deer, and my eyes landed on one in particular. I noticed it, because even though it was a doe, it was a good bit taller than the others, and seemed to be oddly bulky and slightly misshapen. I watched it for about a second before, out of nowhere, its head shot up from the grass, and it stared directly at me. I hadn't been moving, and both my dogs were inside with me asleep, but I knew that it was focusing in on me. We stared for about a second before it started to whip its head around in a really unnatural motion. The closest analogy I could make is when a video game glitches and the head of a character starts moving around wildly. It did this for another second before putting its head back down into the grass like nothing had happened. At this point, I knew something was very wrong, and I knew I had to get out of there. I called my mom, who was out fishing with my stepdad, and told her I was going home early because I was freaking out. I suffer from anxiety and can sometimes have panic attacks, so she understood, and I hauled ass to my car. All I grabbed was my phone, my Lunchables, and an Eeyore blanket that I had brought from my house. I don't really know why I grabbed the extra two things besides my phone, but I wasn't really thinking clearly. I'm usually a very careful driver, especially on my grandparents' shoddy gravel driveway, but I knew I had to get off their property or else I would be in real danger. My car is shitty, with the driver's side window permanently down. The entire time I drove up their half-mile-long driveway, I heard a sound coming just off from behind my car. It sounded like if a mammal tried to replicate the sound of a cicada. Very throaty and unnatural, and it was the same constant distance from my car the entire drive off the property. Right in front of the gate before going back out onto the road were a few of my grandparents' cows. I laid eyes on a black figure amongst them, and almost like an optical illusion, it changed to be a full front profile on a longhorn. I wouldn't have thought this with my eyes playing tricks on me, because I was in a panic. If it wasn't for the horns. When I saw the quote-unquote cow, it was a black figure with no horns, but within a second I spotted it. It suddenly had two giant horns on either side of its head. I managed to drive home, but I still felt extremely unsafe. My instincts were telling me that if I went inside, I'd be cornering myself. At this point, I was sitting in my driveway, near hysterics, and on the phone with one of my friends, who I'll call Hope. Hope is extremely knowledgeable with this kind of stuff, and a true believer in the supernatural, and I knew she would be the only person who wouldn't think I was losing my mind. She talked to me and calmed me down, and I explained the deer to her, and she got pretty freaked out, and told me she knew what it probably was. I told her that I didn't want to know because I already had an idea as to what it might be, and her confirmation would only freak me out more. At this point, I made up my mind to go to my closest neighbor's house. I knew if I stayed alone, I would be putting myself in danger. So cue me crying and clutching an Eeyore blanket as I stroll up to my neighbor's backyard, weeping and apologizing profusely. Thankfully, my neighbors are saints, and they took me inside and calmed me down. They stayed up with me for a good hour until my mom and stepdad got home from the lake, and I felt safe enough to go home. Because I had finally fully calmed down, I decided to go back to the ranch with my mom to clean up the mess I had left when I booked it out of there. But by the time we were there, even remotely close to the ranch, I felt the panic return. We got halfway down the driveway before I told my mom I couldn't do it and I had to go back. My mom was still planning to go back after she dropped me off at home, but I knew she'd be in danger if she went back alone. So I told her about the deer, and I told her I really don't want her to go back there that night, and she agreed. Hope has an older sister who is extremely well versed in the supernatural, and when she informed her of my experience, her advice was for me to never go back. This wasn't entirely realistic to me, since they are my grandparents, and I did leave most of my stuff there. But I tried to take her warning as seriously as possible, and decided to greatly limit my time there, and not to go back alone until my grandparents returned. The next day, which is today, at about noon, I had to go back to gather my stuff and check on my grandparents' diabetic dog, and let the bigger outside dog in, so he would be safe from the heat. The feeling of the place was still tense and strange, but not terrifying. Later, at about 8, I had to go back again, this time to feed the dog, let the other one out, and water the plants. I was way more hesitant about it, but my mom forced me to go. I was keeping my cool pretty well, until, as we were going down the driveway, I saw a deer standing in the road. I immediately felt the fear of the previous night, and started freaking out, telling my mom that I couldn't do it and that she had to turn around. As I was freaking out, with my mom distracted, trying to calm me down, this fucking deer arched its back, like when a cat stretches. That tipped me over the edge into full hysterics, but my mom still refused to take me home. My mom went inside my grandparents' house and I stayed in the truck, and called Hope again. I told her what I saw and she tried to calm me down, but nothing really worked. As I was freaking out on the phone, I saw a black shadow dart into and then out of the rearview mirror. That was it. I called my mom and was screaming for her to come back inside and take me home. Even during normal panic attacks, it never reaches this point, and my mom was screaming so harshly that my vocal cords hurt. She tried to convince me to come inside, and eventually she decided to take me home, and I was hyperventilating and sobbing until the moment I arrived back. At this point, I'm terrified and I don't know what to do. I've never experienced anything like this before, and although I hope this is going to be an isolated sense of occurrences, I can't be for sure. For now, I'm going to try to stay away from my grandparents' ranch, but that really isn't realistic. I could use any advice you're willing to give. It was around 10 at night, off a little ways from Ocean City, Maryland. It was Mother, her friend, and my sister and I. We were driving home from our vacation, and I asked if we could take the back roads. I always loved seeing the woods at night, and it was the scenic route. We were driving down, and although I was the one who asked for the trees, I was ironically on my phone texting and listening to music. We eventually came to a stretch of road that I didn't pay much attention to. It was boring, but I occasionally looked up every now and then as I did the entire ride. It was a straight path forward with nothing but streetlights, so we were driving and driving. As we crossed under the lights, it was almost relaxing. I went into a half-sleep trance. Then I suddenly woke up, and everything was fine. More lights as we drove by. No one was talking. My mom's boyfriend wasn't asleep, but there were no muffled conversations. Everything seemed calm, but I had this sudden awareness we were in the middle of the woods. It was dark and around 11:30 or 12. Without streetlights, you couldn't see anything but the stars. I immediately felt very paranoid. I turned my phone on and listened to the music. Then, we entered back to another stretch of light and drove on, and I started to feel a little bit better. This part is strange, because it was as if something told me to go to my phone, as if there was a notification. I checked and there was nothing there, and then I noticed something in my obscured vision. There were about 4 lights up ahead that were turned off, in an area where the road kind of turns. It was a fairly wooded area, and you couldn't see much without the light, so we slowed down. I didn't pay much attention to it, but this next part sticks with me. As we slowly approached the next light that was on, something crawled out from the woods and into the light. I looked up and thought it was a deer at first, but it kept moving out. It was limping, but when it fully emerged, what I saw was truly bone-chilling. A naked, ash-white skinny man crawled out on all fours. It stopped, and as I saw it, it turned its head at us. Its eyes were deep charcoal black. We sped up fast and started driving. It wasn't human. As we drove past it, it jumped over our car weightlessly, defying physics. My mom's Mercedes had 2 sunroofs, and although it was a blur, I got a close look at it. As it passed over the car, it landed behind us and faded into the black. The scary part was, when it jumped over our car, our sunroof was open. My name is Carlos. I am now currently 14 years old. This sighting happened while I was backpacking in rural Arkansas, high in the mountains. Me and my friends, which for confidential reasons, I won't say their names, but let's call them Jerome, John, Caleb, and my crush who I will call Laura, went backpacking with my fellow church youth. On the very first day backpacking, I noticed how quiet it was. I mean, like the forest was empty, kinda. It was just silent. But I ignored it and put it off, as maybe it was just very quiet here. But being a country boy, I should have known better. After long and tiring 5 hours of walking, we finally decided to stop and rest for the night. I will explain how the surrounding area looked like, because it is important. We were separated into 2 groups, guys and girls. Us guys, we slept in a clearing near a massive hill, while the girls slept under a ridge of a cliff, and on the right of both camps was a river. Also in between the camps was a ravine. Us guys, being young and stupid, decided to explore before it was too dark. We ended up finding this cave around 30 feet away from our camp. After exploring the cave, which was empty, we decided to go eat dinner. For some reason, we didn't marry. After eating, our counselor told us that we needed to have a buddy system when we used the bathrooms because it was hunting season. After the meeting, we went to bed. That night, I woke up with a strong urge to pee. Being the good friend I am, I didn't wake up any of my sleeping friends as I climbed up that massive hill to pee behind a tree or near the top. Now, I know that was dumb, but hey, you'd rather go pee in a ravine. Now, what sounds better? As I was going up, I heard a branch break, but I brushed it off as some kind of nocturnal animal during mid-pee. I heard a low growl. It was like a guttural growl. I was in mid-pee. I couldn't stop as soon as I finished peeing. I raced down the hill and made the mistake of turning around. I saw a massive, easily 6 foot tall, very pale humanoid-looking creature with huge black eyes which were fixated on me. I immediately ran to my tent and passed out from fright. The next morning as we were leaving, I saw in that cave a pale-looking face peering out at me. My friends didn't believe me, but one of my friends came up to me and told me that he saw it because he takes medication for his depression and he thought he was hallucinating. A few months back, I was on a routine 3rd shift. I work as a police officer in a very small town in Ohio. It is currently the middle of fall. I'm not going to say where. People can find it pretty easily. Anyway, I was on night patrol, driving in my patrol car. Most nights, we are required to get out of our cruisers to check areas our cruisers can't fit. There is a super long, almost 2-mile bike path we are supposed to walk down. Well, one night as usual, I got out and walked the path. Usually, we do this to make sure no one is hurt or overdosed. My flashlight was dimmed during the walk, since I forgot to put it on the charger earlier that day. About 1 mile into the walk, I start to feel very strange. Not a typical gut feeling. A feeling that you know something is wrong, or something is about to go wrong. I began to hear leaves crunching. Turning in every direction, the leaves would break. My light is so dim it is hard to see much of anything. I continue trying to get this walk over. I start to speed up. In doing so, I must have triggered something's instinct. Every time I sped up, the breaking of leaves would get louder and continue with my pace. I get to the point where I know something is there, so I just stop and listen. I waited for 5 minutes, hoping to catch some kids playing a prank or a fellow officer trying to get a laugh. But nothing. The sounds have stopped. I began shining my light all around me, slowly turning my light from the tree to tree. Then I noticed something odd. I passed by it the first time. I shined my light back in the direction I noticed from earlier. I can see something, but at the time, it was hard to make out. The only difference I noticed was the contrast in colors. Old gray and black with red and orange leaves in a brown tree. I shined my light up from it. Then, 2 huge glowing eyes. Nothing like I have ever seen before. I have seen deer, wolves, and other animal eyes that reflect light, but nothing like this. I hesitated, almost drawing my firearm, but I stopped myself, knowing that I could get myself in trouble if it was a prankster. This thing took 1 step out from behind the tree. I got a whole body view. It was covered in feathers, extremely tall, and didn't appear to be completely human. I noticed it had hands like a human, but it having feathers that looked almost forced into the skin. I start to back up. Thankfully, it never moved more than when it did earlier. I was frozen in fear, too scared to move, but I snapped out of it when dispatch radioed. "Police 1, check up." The sounds of the radio snapped me out of my trance. I started walking backwards very quickly, not taking my eyes off this thing one time. It felt like forever, but I finally got back out of those woods. My cruiser was in the clearing. I bolted as fast as I could to it, not looking back until I got back in. I looked into the wood line from where I came in. Then I could see this thing's whole body, head shaped like a demonic owl. Head laying tilt, just staring with its huge eyes. Its body, covered in some parts by feather, other by skin that appeared to be falling off, like it was rotting. Then a terrible odor came through, so powerful it is engraved into my memory. I unlocked my cruiser, crawled in and locked my doors. I attempted to shine my spotlight and brights at it, but it ran back into the woods, letting out a scream that was like no other. I could feel the creatures below rattle my insides, leaving me almost sick to my stomach. After it ran, I drove back up to my station, sitting inside to recap what had just happened. I asked my fellow officers about it sometime later, but got very odd responses. I was being told to never look where the noises came from. It would be better if I just ignored them altogether. I was confused at this point, wondering if they had seen it themselves, but I was never given a definitive answer, just told to keep my light charged and my eyes forward. If you enjoyed these stories, please hit that like button as it helps me out a lot. If you're new to the swamp, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to never miss a new video, as I upload almost every single day on all things creepy and anomalous. I'll see you guys soon with another creepy video. If you have a story with a skinwalker or wendigo that you'd like to share in a future video, be sure to send it to the website or the email that you can find in the description down below.
Peering through me with yellow eyes, and I passed out from fright at the moment. I woke up on the floor at 6 a.m., and I thought I had dreamed it and went back to bed, being the little kid I was. This experience dubbed my anxiety. It happened about 4 months ago. I lived in the Texas Panhandle. I was in my room talking to my girlfriend at the time. She's of Navajo descent, and I had my window open, and I heard what sounded like an old-time radio static, and smelled rotting meat, so I looked out my window and saw a coyote, standing 7 feet tall on its back legs looking around. So I shut and locked everything up. I heard tapping on the window for the rest of the night. I told my girlfriend what happened the next morning, and she came over and blessed me and the house and everything in it. Then she blessed herself and her household, and I haven't seen one since. When I was about 5 years old, I used to live in an isolated region in Arizona, in the Navajo reservation near a little town called Steamboat. The land belonged to my great-grandmother, and not much was built there, only a couple houses and some graves. I used to love it there, me just running around with all of this land to explore. I lived there with my 2 brothers and 1 sister, mother, stepfather, and great-grandma. Being Navajo, I commonly used to hear the term skinwalker, and how they can curse people just by taking such things like the victim's hair, urine, nails, and saliva. I never really thought much about it though, until that one night. It was a typical, busy, cold night. My parents left somewhere for the night with my great-grandmother, and my older brother and sister headed into town. All there was me and my brother, who was about 7 at the time. I decided to go to sleep, being ordered to by my mom, who had just left minutes after I fell asleep. Being asleep, I was alarmed by what seemed to be knocks at my window. I didn't really think much about it. Instead, I tried to fall back asleep, hoping my mom returns back soon. I go back to sleep. I woke up in shock. Barks coming from all around the house. These didn't sound like our dogs we had at the ranch, as all of them sounded exactly the same when compared to each other. It sounded like 4 or 5 surrounding the house. I was scared, being only 5. I had no idea what to do. Those 5 minutes of hiding under the blanket crying as 4 or 5 coyotes surround the house. I looked in the living room and the TV was on with my stepdad sleeping. Made my way into the living room and tried to wake up my mom. She wakes up with the barking continuing. Just go to sleep, they'll go away. I try to sleep, crying, scared, traumatized. The next morning was strange. No sleep, no acknowledgement. No one was talking about it. It was like it never happened. Mom remembers it, but she doesn't talk about it. My stepfather runs into the house. The sheep. We rushed outside, leaving our food behind, and what happened to our sheep was devastating. They were all gone. No trace. Nothing. So far, I'm clueless in why the sheep were gone, and where those coyotes came from. The first thing that I can remember of that night was it was a cold, crisp evening out in the pasture. The grass was tall and crunched beneath me with every footstep. I saw a dried red trail and I thought it was a deer that had been injured. I brushed it off. I kept walking until about midnight, and it was even colder than when I started. I had walked for miles and was about to turn home. I felt a presence, so I looked back and saw my friend smiling at me. I could smell a horribly putrid smell coming from the direction of him, with every gust of wind. I didn't think much of it. I asked him what he was doing here. With his small, quiet voice, he replied, "I thought I would just drop by and join you on a walk." He usually doesn't walk with me, so that's when I began to become curious about what he was really doing here. I began to catch up with him because I haven't seen him in a week or 2. I asked him a few questions, and of course, he replied. It didn't really sound like him, though. I finished my walk and he went away. Later, as I was laying in bed, I thought about attending a funeral. I couldn't exactly remember whose it was. I left that thought and went to a happy one, and then drifted into slumber. The next day seemed pretty normal. I woke up, ate breakfast, etc. I even went into town to grab a few things from the store, like some gas, groceries, and other stuff like that. I came home and stocked my pantries, and sat down to see what was on the news. I found out that a man went missing. I didn't hear the name or see the picture because the TV lost signal. I started to feel uneasy. I didn't know what for. I thought I would just keep that to myself. It sounded like a good idea, so I stuck with it. I carried out the rest of my day normally. Later, I got ready to go for a walk. It was getting dark out, so I grabbed my flashlight and headed out. A few hours passed, and it was really dark outside. My friend appeared out of nowhere, and then began talking like normal. He still smelled terrible and wasn't acting right. I began to think back to what I thought the night before. I remembered I was going to my friend's funeral. He had been missing. He died. How was he here right now? I put two and two together and finally realized what was before me. From all those stories I've heard, skinwalkers tend to stink terribly, and they take on the shape of whatever animal or person they got to. The head looks very much like my friend's. I realized that when it started to grow its legs out. It says, "You look like you saw a ghost," with an expression that had been a mix of anger and adrenaline. It was what a killer looks like before they get somebody. I saw all the skin that was previously on it melt off, and it turned into a 10-foot tall gray thing. And when it turned slowly back to its bony structure, I just stood there, almost to the point of insanity with fright. It stared into the deepest part of my soul, and I felt it. With all of my might, I ran off into the forest. That thing followed me. I found a trail that led deeper into the trees. My flashlight beam was dancing side to side while I ran. It was one of the most hypnotizing things to me. It was until I stumbled and almost fell. I hastily regained my balance and kept running. It was getting harder to see. My flashlight, the batteries were wearing out on it. I had to find a place to hide or tire this thing out enough so I could change the batteries. I knew that thing was just trying to tire me out, because it didn't look like it was straining at all. It looked like it could do that for hours at a time, so that told me my second option wasn't a choice for consideration. After about 100 yards of sprinting, I took a sharp corner and climbed up a tree real fast, and it kind of worked. That thing was puzzled on where I went. I didn't realize it, but I had my hand over my mouth trying not to make a sound. It screeched. I had goosebumps so big, my shirt shrunk 2 sizes. It sent shivers down my spine and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. It sounded like a bird with the screech of a demon mixed together. I could not believe how it sounded. I had only heard something like that once before, when my teacher would put her nails on the chalkboard and slide them. I silently changed the batteries on my flashlight and reassembled it. I took off one of the old batteries and chucked it into the woods further off. I heard it crashing in the distance and heard the thing take off after it. It sounded like it was a car on the highway. It just took off. I climbed down and ran in the opposite direction of which I threw the battery. I turned my flashlight back on and started going faster. There were some deer running behind me. I thought nothing of it and went on. That thing came up from behind and got one of the deer. I stopped to catch my breath. The dust from the path had kicked up and now blinded me from the view of that thing, and hopefully it had lost all sight of me too. I was wrong. I heard those same words coming from nowhere but everywhere at once. It had a slight echo to it. In a faint whisper I heard, "You look like you saw a ghost. How about I comfort you?" From the thick dust, it jumped down next to me from above. It screeched and ran after me. I had already started running. I had tried to jab a stick into it, but it stayed alive and full of energy. I got lucky. It got tired. It stopped after hours of running. I found a stream. I took a few sips from its clean, fresh water. I sat down on a stump. It was soaked. I turned my flashlight on and looked where I had been sitting. It was red, smelt like iron, and was dripping. It was coming from my leg. The skinwalker got it. I took the sock off and tied it around my leg. It burned, but the dripping slowed. I knew I better get a move on before something else happens. I was in the middle of the field when I heard a screech. I just ran home. I was soon there, and the gash was bad. I got some rubbing alcohol and poured it on there. It burned like a fuse of a firework on the 4th of July. I got some water, then rinsed it out. I felt a little burn from the alcohol, but not much more. The sun was coming up, so I made some coffee and went into my Saturday and got out of there. I have told this story many times over, and almost nobody believes me. I was almost put into a padded room with a straitjacket on, because they thought I was crazy. That was until they saw the scar. There was almost nothing that could match the look of that gash. It had the signature mark from a skinwalker. I say again, almost nothing could match it. I remember back to this night sometimes and wonder to myself, what would have happened if I stopped? That never leaves my mind. Sometimes when I'm asleep, I dream back to that night when I was awakened. I have that same feeling of being watched. I feel like I'm being stalked. I still hear those footsteps and screeches coming from the dark forest every once in a while. There's nothing like them. This happened when I was 15 years old. I had an aunt and uncle, and they lived on a rural farm in the middle of Washington in a small town. My grandmother lived in a cottage about 100 feet from the main house, and my grandma had a dog named Maggie, and she's about 11 years old. I had my mom make my bed on the couch, and this house was very small. Every part could be seen from the front window, and I was right underneath that. The window had a view of a road with tall pine trees behind it, so I finally drift off to sleep as my family were all watching a movie. I woke up and everything was dark out, but the thing was, I heard the dog walking around. I brushed it off and decided to get up to go to the restroom, and I realized there was no dog and my grandma's room was closed, and the dog always sleeps with her. It hit me like a truck. So the restroom was unfortunately on the other side of the house in the far corner of the property. I decided to just go behind a tree because I was going outside. I crept into my grandmother's room and grabbed the dog. As we walked out the door, the dog started to whimper, and she ran out of the door to the edge of the road and just stared into the woods. I yelled for her to get back, but she wouldn't. She just sat and stared. I had to go and grab her to drag her back into the house. When I reached her, I decided to look where she was, and I saw nothing. So I went to the restroom and went back into the house. I put Maggie back into my grandma's room and went to sleep. It was about 3:14 a.m. But I woke up sometime later by the sound of a dog walking again. So I got up and saw that my grandma's room was open. So I thought it was Maggie. But then I looked and the front door was wide open and I froze in fear. Then I found the courage to look outside. So I went and walked through the door, and I saw a trail of red leading from the door to the road. I followed the trail into the woods, and then I saw Maggie in a tree, and I looked at what was holding her. It was a tall-looking man, I thought at first, but it had very distorted features, and then I realized it looked like a deer. I froze and ran back into the cottage. I was so scared, I yelled for my family, and they ran out of the rooms, and I explained what I had seen to them. So my dad went out and I followed them, and he froze in fear before me, and he turned around and ran back into the house. I chased him and he had told me what he had seen and described the same thing as me the next day. We packed up and left, and haven't been back since. A few years ago, 2012 or 13 I think, since I was still in high school then, I was at a party with some friends, and as the night goes on, maybe 11 or 12 at night, one of my friends and I go outside to have a cigarette. The second we get out there, there's just this completely awful, foul smell, just like vomit and decay all at once. Now this was in the middle of nowhere, so we just figured it was an old animal, and went on having a cigarette. Less than a minute later, we hear something moving in the dark, and sure enough, a deer comes hobbling into the very edge of the porch light. But then I noticed something. One of its front legs was messed up in some way. I'm talking like broken in multiple places messed up. So my friend and I are slightly put off by this, and finish up our cigarette and go inside. However, right as we start to do that, one of the two porch lights goes pop and then goes out. So now there's less light outside and the deer goes back into darkness. So, a bit giddy, we both do a fake scared squeal at each other and turn around and go inside. And that's when we heard it. That undeniable sound of nails on the concrete patio. We both slowly turn around and see this hunched over, rotten coyote doing this very slow, unnatural crawl toward us. We go from 0 to 600, paralyzed with fear, almost instantly, until another one of our friends playfully pulls us through the open door, telling us to get back to the party. To this day, I have not experienced anything like that, and it's one of the most horrifying things I've ever experienced. I live in the mountains about 10 miles outside of a small town, near a winding backroad highway well known for its many accidents, a lot of which happen to be collisions with animals, deer, small rodents, and sometimes more often than not, mountain lions. I grew up in the country my whole life, so I've seen just about every animal my side of the state has to offer, whether alive or roadkill. Recently, I saw one that I could neither identify or rationalize. My husband and I had stopped by for dinner with his coworkers in town down the winding road from our home. Once it grew close to midnight, I knew we should be getting home. My husband insisted he wanted to stay a little bit longer to have a drink with his buddy. Reluctantly, I agreed he could stay, even though he knows I hate going home late at night by myself. We have about a half a mile of driveway leading to our home, which is blocked off by a padlocked gate. I get paranoid every time I have to get out of my car to unlock the gate pull inside, and then relock the gate behind me. Not that I'm afraid of something attacking me, but way up in the country a wild animal mauling me. The number of mountain lions and bears in our area was definitely above average. I headed back home alone, my husband promising he'd only be out for another hour. I took the dangerous road extra cautiously in the evening. The thick cover of trees surrounding the road made it pitch black. After finally arriving at my road, I hit the gravel fast, eager to get inside. What I saw next made me slam on my brakes so hard I fishtailed a bit and scattered gravel every which way. What I saw barely 2 feet in front of my car was incomprehensible. It looked almost like a human figure at first. Its ribs stuck out so far it took a barrel shape. It was hunched over, but if it stood up straight it had to be at least 8 feet tall. Tufts of matted hair all over its body. What skin shone through appeared to be mangled. Long limbs resembling human arms, but too thin and discolored. Its legs arched like wolves. It had no sign of a human face. The face it had seemed to be a snout that contained a sharp set of canine teeth that shone and snarled at me. My eyes locked with its piercing yellow eyes. It stared me down for what felt like an eternity. Then all of a sudden it broke our gaze, swiftly disappearing into the woods. I was so scared I sat in my car until my husband arrived home after an hour later. He had to knock on my window to get my attention. He questioned me about it once we were in the safety of our own home. I've been dealing with paranormal experiences with spirits since I was a child, but my husband says he has never seen me this shook up before. I'll take a ghost over that creature any day. This is a story I was told by one of the other guides who had spent around 6 years guiding canoe trips in the Lake of the Woods. Let's call him Steven. I want to remind you that I did not experience this, but Steven had told me about a few experiences he and the other guides he worked with had. What I do want you to know is that we do not joke around about Wendigos or skinwalkers at our workplace. We do not tell these stories to our campers anymore, and we don't even say their name but refer to them only as W or S. This is not something that we joke about or just make up to scare campers. I'm not an expert in Wendigos or skinwalkers or Native American culture by any means, and I hope not to offend anyone, but the knowledge that I have on them has been passed down by guides and their experiences. One detail that I should explain before I tell Steven's story is that a definite way to tell that you are seeing a Wendigo or a skinwalker is if the animal or creature has 2 bright, glowing red or yellow eyes. One summer, about 5 to 6 years ago, Steven had a couple encounters with the Wendigo. His first encounter was on an earlier trip in the summer, where their destination was into Shoal Lake. It was a 6-day trip, which had about 60 miles of paddling, and taking your packs and canoes over the land to another lake, into Shoal. On day 4, they were going out of Shoal, through a portage called Headman's Portage. Sounds made up from some scary story. No idea why they call it that, but it's quite fitting. There was a campsite that is pretty frequently used about half a mile from the portage. We just called the campsite Headman's. Steven and his trip left Shoal Lake aiming to get through Headman's Portage and stay at the campsite right after it. It's a little long, but a nice highway of portage without too many ups and downs. I believe the Canadian Park Service even clears out this portage, which may be the only one that is frequently maintained in the Lake of the Woods. The short paddle from the portage to the campsite is just surreal and beautiful. It's through a little stream, with 10 to 15 foot cliffs on both sides covered in moss and beautiful cedars. Steven and his trip got to Headman's campsite, and later on, just before they were going to bed, they discovered they left their sleeping bag at the end of the portage. It was around 9, so it was getting pretty dark by this point. Steven and a camper set off in a canoe with their headlamps quickly to retrieve the pack. The paddle took them about a half hour, and at this point you could really only see what your headlamp was shining on. They grabbed the bag and started to head back. Shortly after leaving, Steven started to hear loud splashes and things falling from the water behind them. He dismissed it at first because beavers are pretty common in this area, and when they slap their tails it sounds pretty identical to a huge rock being chucked into the water. But the splashes kept going, and were right on his back as they kept paddling. Steven looked behind him to see a huge rock around the size of a baseball come flying at him and land into the water at his side. They began to paddle like crazy to get back to the campsite and away from whatever was chucking these giant, super heavy rocks at them. Steven looked back between the paddles, and on one of the cliffs about 15 feet up, He saw 2 distinct red glowing eyes on top of it. The rocks stopped and they made it back okay. The rest of their trip went along nicely without any other occurrences. But I never feel great about going through Headman's Portage, and triple check that I don't have any bags there when I do. This story takes place about 2 years ago. My aunt, married into the family, has cousins, not related to me, who live on a farm in La Pointe, Utah, on a reservation, and thought it would be fun to have all us other cousins go stay with her for a few days and see the Dinosaur National Monument. My aunt's grandmother had recently passed away, and her house was basically empty, so we went to stay there. It was a pretty old house, to say the least. It was made out of painted white cedar blocks and was pretty run down, but we were only staying there a few days, so we didn't care how luxurious it was. The front door led into a small kitchen, and off the kitchen to the right was a small room with a TV, 2 couches, and a chair. Off of that room was a larger living area with 2 more pull-out couches and a door leading to the side of the house. Off the living room was a hall that led into 2 small bedrooms and a bathroom. It was a pretty small house considering we had around 18 people staying there. Along with the old and empty house we were staying in, there were 2 other houses on the property belonging to my aunts, cousins, and their families. These were the only houses for about 2 miles. There were 12 kids in total, ranging from 3 to 16, me being the oldest, as well as the 2 other kids who lived in the other houses who wanted to come stay with us. We all slept on the pull-out couches and the floor. Other than the parents, there were 2 other people who were staying there. They were soon to be married, so they were staying there for a few days before the wedding. It was a whole big mess of people, but bear with me. They didn't want to sleep in the same house because they weren't married, and religion and all this crap. So the guy, we'll call him B, was sleeping in the small camper outside while his fiancée slept in one of the bedrooms. Now we can actually get to the creepy stuff. On the first night we were there, me and one of my cousins were on the pull-out couch in the first little room, while all the other kids were either on the other couches or on the floor, in either our room or the other. It was about midnight. Most of the kids were already asleep. We were watching Disney movies and dozing off when we started to hear strange noises outside toward the field. It sounded like low growling and panting, but not entirely like it was coming from an animal. There was just this weird, human-like sound to it. I assumed it was some sort of stray animal, and got up to see when one of the other kids who lived next door, we'll call him L, jumped up and told me just to ignore it and go to sleep. I was really confused and the noises were still happening, but the terrified look on his face told me I should listen. The creature would pace around the house and stop at the door by the kitchen for a few minutes before continuing to circle the house. Neither of us got any sleep that night. The next night was basically the same setup. Kids sleeping everywhere, movies playing, a few people still dozing off. I was exhausted from the night before and managed to fall asleep when I was woken up by one of the youngest kids quietly crying and crawling into bed with me. We'll call him A. I asked him what was the matter, and he said he was scared by the big dog outside the window. I turned to L and asked if they had a dog. He looked completely scared out of his mind and said no, and told me to ignore it once again. I stayed up for a while after that, watching movies with A, when he asked me to walk with him to the bathroom. A little bit of explanation before I continue. This house was shaped like a short L, the bottom part being the kitchen and the 2 living rooms, and where it turns was the hallway with the bedrooms and the bathroom. The bathroom was right at the beginning of the hall. There was a small window to where you could see the wall, where the first living room was, straight ahead, along with a window that you could see through into the living room, where we were sleeping, and then the rest of the house to the left. Anyways, I was walking A to the bathroom and switch on the light when I see it. An extremely tall, dog-like creature standing on its hind legs facing the window looking into the living room. Its fur was matted and its eyes seemed to be almost glowing orangish red. Its hands looked human-like, but with dark fur and long claws. I screamed and the creature ran back around the side of the house on its hind legs. I picked up A and carried him back to the living room to quickly find L closing the curtains. "What was that?" I whispered to L. "I don't know. If you ignore it, it'll go away," he whispered back. "You've seen it before?" "Only a couple times, but not recently." Our talking woke up Elle's younger sister, and surprisingly, nobody else. I'm guessing she knew what was going on because she seemed just as scared as we were. I sat A down on the bed and turned the TV up louder, drowning out the sounds that the creature was making outside, and hoping to calm A down a bit and take our minds off whatever the hell we just saw. The noises circling the house continued for about another half hour, when they stopped at the back door in the other room. I peered my head around the corner to face the door. The door handle on the first door started to move back and forth. You could see the silhouette of something huge behind it. I rushed over to shut and lock the other door, trying not to wake anyone else. Just as I did, B, guy sleeping in the camper outside, also L's uncle, burst through the kitchen door, slamming it behind him. L asked B what was going on, but he didn't want to say another word and rushed down the hall and into the bedroom with his fiancée. He came out holding a shotgun and pulled a chair into the corner of the living room, giving him a view of both the kitchen and the back door. He gave us a look of both terror and anger. He told us to go back to sleep. We didn't. He sat there all night until the noises stopped around sunrise, then went back outside into the camper without saying a word. I'm surprised no one else woke up, and no one else knows what happened that night. The next morning, there were huge paw prints around the house, and B was discussing something with L's dad, who lived in one of the other houses. They both looked concerned and scared. It was very unsettling. We left later that day for reasons I can't remember, but I'm glad we did. I didn't want to spend another night in that house, and I'm pretty sure that what we saw that night was a skinwalker. This story belongs to a friend of mine. He told me this once, and I simply have to tell it. My friend is of Native American heritage, a tribe who settled the North Pacific West Coast. He is quite the character. For one, he is a whopping 6'10", and he has the blackest eyes you could imagine. He always has this frowning face going on, which makes him seem even more intimidating. He is everything but a bad guy. In fact, he is the most gentle of giants. He was working at a gas station up north back in 1992, and he pretty much always worked the graveyard shift from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Business wasn't exactly booming at nights, so he was usually watching TV or reading magazines between customers, and there were a few. The area he lived and worked in was deeply associated with all things Native American. There was a potent sense of pride in the surrounding communities, but also a very distinct presence of superstition and old traditions. My friend was no exception. He was a firm believer of the ways of old. This made his encounter even more terrifying. One night, he was sitting as usual, watching TV when a customer entered the gas station. The customer paid for his gas, a pack of smokes, and some soda, and returned to his car. Nothing unusual. But my friend looked out the window toward the customer's car, and he spotted what looked like a huge dog sitting by the edge of the woods. Now, the window was located on the side of the building, some distance from the door, overlooking the pumps and the roof covering it. On the sides of the roof are pretty strong lights, which shine into the gas station. This gives the gas station not only an eerie lighting with the blinds casting long, striped shadows, but also blinds the teller to an extent. As he peered through the window, trying to focus on the dog, it was gone. He didn't think much of it, even if it was a wolf. He was inside, and wolves don't tend to rob gas stations at night. Wolves were common here, but this wolf was huge. He brushed it off and returned to his mindless watching of TV. A couple of hours go by and not a single customer has entered since the last one. He was just about to refill some condiments when he heard a large thud coming from the back. It wasn't inside, he could hear that, but it came from the back. And behind the building they kept the garbage. The gas station had been visited before by the scavenging homeless, but my friend didn't really care. It wasn't his garbage, and it was just garbage. Let them take it. But it kept getting louder. He decided to grab a flashlight and a gun from the office and circle around back to tell whoever ventured there to leave. His presence alone would have scared off anyone, but he wanted to feel safe just in case. He exited through the sliding doors, walking past the window he was just sitting by. As he turned the corner, he shines a light towards the dumpsters. As the cone of light hits the dumpsters, my friend instantly drops the flashlight and the gun. It's the huge dog he saw before, scouring through the garbage. It wasn't a dog, though. It clearly stood on its hind legs, reaching the same height as him. It couldn't be a bear, as it was too gaunt. The creature's eyes had been glowing in the light of the flashlight, making it even more terrifying. He ran inside the gas station and wasn't followed. He locked the door, stayed inside the whole night, and quit the next day. My friend is convinced that he saw a skinwalker, a shape-shifting shaman of sorts, which are a common occurrence in the Native American lore and culture. It's just a really creepy story. I'm not sure what to think of what happened. I may just be overthinking things, or my sister may have just been joking with me. I figured I would share my small story here, in case anyone had any insight on what happened. However, I don't quite believe anything is monstrous, as I suspect to be at fault. I probably just misheard. For perspective, I will tell you that I live out of the southern part of British Columbia, Canada. I live a good hour and a half away from the nearest town by car, and my home is completely surrounded by forest with a few distant neighbors. It is not uncommon for us to see and hear coyotes, wolves, bears, and cougars, so we have a large dog for protection. However, the latest dog passed on, so our new protector is just a puppy and she's not very brave just yet. And I don't think she could have helped the situation if she wanted to. It happened the summer after my graduation. I got a call from one of my neighbors asking if I could tend to her garden while her and her husband went on a fishing trip. I took the walk down the hill with my dog through the brush so that she could lay out the details of specific care her plants would need. My family has known this woman since we moved into our home 20 years ago, and as children we would all go down and visit her, make her cards and chat, and she would allow us to play in her swimming pool in the summer. I trust her completely and have house sat for her before, so it was no odd request for my sister and I to go help out. The garden was new and absolutely beautiful. I have a garden of my own, but it was nothing compared to hers, which was gated and was in pristine condition. The mosquitoes were horrid, so she made her instructions short and I retreated back up the hill to inform my little sister of our assignment. The first day was terribly hot. My sister and I attempted to get up early to evade the heat and bloodsuckers, but in the end they were all sitting in the shade waiting for us to arrive. It took a full hour and a half to completely soak the entire garden, and by then we were sweating, bloody, itchy, and irritable from all of our newfound bite marks. We were supposed to water the garden every morning so that the sun wouldn't dry up the water throughout the day. So I got up early to wake my sister, who after yesterday's assignment refused to go down with me, protesting that she wanted to sleep in and to leave her alone. Not wanting to be held responsible for the demise of my neighbor's veggies, I reluctantly trotted down the path to my neighbor's. Both my dogs were off on some squirrel-infested adventure, so my trek was made alone. Only a few birds that morning until I made it farther down, and the closer I got, the quieter it became. My attention, however, was on the sun, and I wanted to finish my task ASAP. When I was almost done, I took a stretch and went to turn off the hose, wiping the sweat from my forehead. Across the field, from the garden, I thought I heard a person, which would have been very odd, so I stood still to listen. What I heard was my sister calling my name in a shrill voice. My sister and I would often call each other in strange, exaggerated screeches and voices in just that particular way. I knew for a fact that my sister is far too lazy to hike all the way down and sneak through the brush across the field just to yell at me. I listened again, but heard nothing. Finishing up, I assumed I had just misheard, believing it to have been a bird or something, though the odd happening struck in my mind. Later on, I referred the account to my sister, who laughed and joked with me that this must have been the creature her friend told her about. The creature she was referring to was called Wendigo, or Skinwalker. I honestly don't know the difference between the two. I don't know what these creatures are or if they actually exist, but if they were to, they're supposed to live in this kind of area. I put it out of my mind anyway, not believing in such things. The next day, I was with my sister tending the garden, and my dog came down to see us. I was shocked to see her paw was all bloody, thinking that she had cut herself on a piece of sheet metal. I ran with her back up to the house to see if I could clean and fix it. My sister didn't want to come up with me, so she stayed in the garden to finish up watering her part. It turned out the blood on my dog's paw was not her own, and that she had simply caught an unfortunate pack rat, whom she delightedly tore to pieces. When I came back, my sister wasn't in the garden. Confused, I began to walk to my neighbor's house when she came outside to meet me. She told me she had heard her name being called from across the field in my voice, in the same way I heard mine. She was visibly spooked and insisted we go back up to our house and leave the garden for tomorrow. I refused and told her she could go up without me if she wanted, but I had to finish the garden. I suspected she was only kidding with me, and I was waiting for her to give up right away, like she normally would. Instead, she stayed with me, holding her arms, and refused to walk home alone. Once we finished, we both came back together for the next 3 mornings to water the garden, and no other occurrences happened. To this day, my sister claims she wasn't lying. I'm not sure if these creatures are supposed to be smart enough or talented enough to pull off stunts so specific. We have lived in the same house in the middle of the woods for our whole lives, and we can be loud and silly without fear of annoying anyone. But if someone or something had been close enough to listen, They definitely had plenty of time to do so. Also, how these occurrences only happened when we were alone gives me goosebumps. If you have any answers for me, I would appreciate any info you have. I won't reveal who I am or much about where I live, and to be honest, it's been a few months since this happened, but I just came to terms with it now, and I have to warn people about what's out there, what they knew, what we don't. Warning, this is a very long read and some of the content below is very disturbing, but I can't hold back, so here's my story. Occasionally, I like to go hiking with my friends. There's not much more to do, honestly. We live in a small mountain town in Colorado. It was fun at first, but by now, we know the trails by heart. By the end of the summer, there was only one we hadn't tried. Now, there's a reason for that. The trail goes right through a portion of the forest that the Ute people consider to be sacred. I'll admit, I have hang-ups when it comes to these things. You don't wear hats in church, you don't let the American flag touch the ground, you don't trudge all over somebody's sacred land for the fun of it. Still, my friend, we'll call him Mark, convinced me to go. He said that regardless of whether I went, he'd go anyway, and since no one else was going, he managed to get me to go with him. That's one of my other hang-ups. Don't go hiking alone. Don't let friends go hiking alone. Too many tragic news stories start that way. So I ended up going with him reluctantly. The whole way there, he was talking about how this was the coolest trail he'd ever been on. Yes, he'd been there before, though only once. His ploy had been to get me to come with him, so he could show me. He admitted this in the casual way that friends admit being jerks to friends. Sometimes I didn't blame him. I had a tendency to have a stick up my butt, and what followed only reinforced it. We arrived at about 9, I remember, giving us plenty of time. It was farther away from the town than most trails, and it wasn't near a paved road, so there was a lot of walking just to get there. No tourists knew about it. A lot of locals and even some Ute didn't know about it. But if you followed a game trail through a bunch of trees, it would widen out and lead its way through some mountains, densely forested terrain. What struck me was how quiet it was. This, apparently, was what Mark found so awesome. For some reason, in this particular place, you couldn't hear any birds chirping or any wildlife whatsoever. It was complete and utter silence. Eventually, I had to go to the bathroom and I stepped off the main road, just so Mark wouldn't see me. As I was going, I spotted something through the trees. It looked like some sort of clearing, just past the shallow creek, with a log going over it. My curiosity got the better of me and I looked at the log. It didn't seem to be an act of nature. It was a makeshift bridge, I was sure. True enough, when I tested it, it seemed to be stable. I put one foot in front of the other and crossed. When I reached the other side, I pulled my way through some trees and saw the first image of the day that I will never forget. Though to many, it wouldn't have seemed like much. In front of me, there was vegetation, trees, ferns, brush, but suddenly, it all stopped. Within a perfect circle, surrounded by small, perfectly arranged rocks, there was nothing but smooth dirt. It was strange, not in the least because the shape of the rocks was absolutely perfect. They were partially submerged in soil and fit together like bricks. Every single one of them was the same uniform white color, and as I got closer, I saw things had been carved on them. Symbols. They were old, very old. Even if I had understood them, their distinct shapes had been lost over the years. That was strange, but what disturbed me was that this circle wasn't actually perfect. On one edge, just one, a group of rocks had been kicked up. They were scattered around, as if they actually had been in a perfect brick wall, and something shattered them. In this area, the otherwise perfectly smooth dirt had been kicked up. There was something about it that just unsettled me. As quiet as the entire forest was, it felt quieter here. I quickly turned around and went back to Mark, who made some lame old number 2 joke. I should have forced him to leave right there. Instead, though, we kept going. After all, the day was only half over. While the forest itself was cool, at least Mark's perspective, I found the trail to be rather disappointing. It just went on and on. There was no alternate paths, and there was hardly any challenging terrain. For Colorado, this whole area was so flat, it was hardly a hike at all. The trail was just long, very long. It took us until noon to reach the end. There was no one else on it. I know that it was a hard trail to find, and many of the other locals might share my sentiments, but we were there all day and we didn't run into anyone. Of course, it wasn't until we reached the end that things started to get really weird. The trail didn't loop at all, and I inwardly groaned, knowing that we would have to walk these same 3 boring hours back. We took our time eating our lunch. As we did, I swear I could hear noises for the first time. There were animals moving through the forest nearby. We could hear the rustling of the brush. I looked and saw through the foliage the vague outline of a single buck's head moving past us. It was odd, but I dismissed it. We packed up what was left of our lunches and started the trek back. Every once in a while, I would hear the rustling again. I'd look into the trees and oftentimes I would see the buck's head. Eventually, though, I noticed it was making far too much noise, and it was doing so far too frequently. Mark told me to slow down and stop, and being Mark, he cracked a joke about it. But finally, he went silent, and we both still heard the rustling. Now even Mark was a little freaked out. He turned around and saw the vaguest outline of the buck's head again. This time to me, there seemed to be something wrong. The head was far too high up, around the higher branches of the trees. I noticed it. Mark didn't. I should have said something, but I didn't have time. Just as I was there, it was gone again, going off further into the forest. I remember Mark talking about how the deer was annoying as hell, about how he was going to scare it off or something. I don't remember exactly what he said, and that bothers me, because I should remember. He was one of my best friends. I do remember him yelling at it, and at the time it was funny. "Hey Buck, yeah, you, leave us alone." He walked off the road and disappeared down the ridge, behind a layer of trees, pursuing it. For a minute there was silence. That minute became 2. "Mark?" I called out. No answer. 5 minutes pass. I climbed down the ridge after him. "Mark." I followed the general direction he had gone in, keeping the way back to the road in my mind. I wouldn't go far. I knew, because he was smart enough to not go far. He hadn't. After a short time, I found a place where there was no signs of struggle. In addition, there was blood. There was a lot of blood. It was all over the trees and all over the ground. I cursed to myself. There were other things too, in addition to the blood. Pieces of flesh that I didn't like to look at. There were marks showing that something had been dragged away from here. "Mark," I called out, ferociously now. Forgetting the trail for a second, I ran forward, along the drag marks. After running too far to be safe, I reached a small ravine, with a creek running through it. I narrowly stopped myself. It wasn't a long drop, but it would hurt you, and a sprained ankle in the middle of the forest was bad news. The trail stopped here. "Mark," I murmured, then called out again, "Mark." I heard something, but it wasn't Mark. Across the ravine from me, I heard rustling and saw the trees stirring. Something stepped through the brush and revealed itself. It was the second image burned into my mind. Please give me a second. I've spent every single day for the past few months trying to tell myself it wasn't real. At first, I saw a head of a buck, but it came forward and I realized that it was at least 7 feet above the ground. I was staring at a 7-foot creature straight in the face that had a massive buck's head, but a humanoid body. The creature snorted. Its buck face remained neutral, scared looking even, as if it wasn't sure of the malicious whims of the body beneath it. There was blood dripping from its horns, which were not like the horns of an average buck, but jagged, pointed, and unorganized, a mess of sharp points. Its human body was dark-skinned and naked. I remember both of its arms and legs. They started human, but near the bottom they distorted and became animalistic. At the end of its legs were powerful hooves. At the end of its arms were hands and very long claws, every bit as jagged as the horns on its head. In one of those claws was Mark's body being held by his shirt. I examined him only briefly, just long enough to notice that the shape of his head was not what it had once been. For a moment there was silence. I didn't scream. I couldn't believe what was in front of me. Then the creature's ears ruffled. It dropped Mark and started backing up. Its deer head hung lazily to the side as it moved. My brain rang. Suddenly, "It's going to jump the gap. It's coming for me." With the logical side of my mind shut off, I turned around and ran, hopefully in the exact opposite direction the way I came. Behind me, I heard a powerful grunt, and then a scuffle of the monster landing on the bank. There was a horrifying roar. Something that sounded like a grizzly bear and a buck shouting together. I had never run so fast or so desperately in all of my life, but it was gaining on me, and as I ran through the forest, I started to feel its warm, hungry breath on my back. Its hands were extending, and I swear I could feel its claws scratch me. I ran and scurried up the bank leading to the path. I don't know how I got there without it grabbing me, but I did. Then I took off down the road, hoping I was going the right direction. While running, I threw off my backpack and gained some speed. I think the bank delayed it, slightly. That's the only reason I can account as to how I got in front of it. Somehow, I ran and ran and ran. I didn't stop. Eventually, I didn't hear it anymore. But I didn't care. I kept running. I have never been a long-distance runner, but my adrenaline was not going to wear off anytime soon. I intended to take advantage of it. When I reached the end of the trail and saw the road again, I couldn't believe it. I got into my car. Just before I took off, I shot a glance back up the trail, at the point where it went up between the two mountains, and was visible from the road. I would regret it. Standing there at the beginning of the trail was the skinwalker, as I've come to call it. It had given up its chase, but stood there, watching me hungrily, waiting to see if I would come back. Its deer head hung lazily dead to one side. The blood on its body was beginning to dry. It had run the whole trail and didn't look tired at all. I twisted the ignition and floored the car and never came back. They never found Mark, and I would never explain what happened. No one would believe me. I thought I needed to tell someone, which is why I'm posting it here. It came back to me in my dreams, nightmares. That creature, the skinwalker. Somehow, I doubt that forest was really sacred. In fact, I'm sure it was the opposite. Because the image that flashes through my mind most often is not the horrific creature. It isn't Mark's corpse. It's that circle, which must have been maintained over the years by those who knew, those who understood. That old circle, left alone for so long. I'm not being followed by anything other than my memories of that moment. That moment that felt like an eternity to me was clearly only a few seconds, but they were the most haunting seconds of my life. For a bit of context, I'm a Canadian university student currently living in central Quebec. Not like Montreal or anything, but a very small town bordering a very small city in the middle of nowhere. The landscapes are sort of an emerald dream, with titanic mountains jutting out aggressively, all of which blanketed in a dense forest. I love my town. Everything's within walking distance. Friends, the bar, the lake. It's all great and nearby. So we often hit the town together. No need to drive anywhere or anything. Last night, we decided to have a little bonfire on this little ridge off the side of the lake, which doesn't really provide too much surface area for a bonfire. For this reason, the 10 of us were huddled around a dimly lit campfire instead. Guitar is being played, fine alcohol is being drank, and good times are being had by all. As the night draws on, I've charged myself with keeping the bulk of the fire going. Nobody else is too apt at any sort of camping, or otherwise outdoorsy activities in my group. Up to this point, all was very normal, other than my close friends acting a little off. After our first few, he had ran out and left by himself to go get more. The ridge was out of sight of the road due to the dense forest paths that we used to get to and from it, so he goes and cuts through it alone. When he gets back, he's acting like he had 100 beers. Looked like he wasn't used to his legs. Strangely enough, he had a full case of beer with him, so I assumed he hadn't drank any more. He also wasn't gone for very long at all. Honestly, we drank together often, me and him. I know what he's like drunk, and this was especially unusual. So he's trying to talk to the people, but he just can't say real words. It's as if he was trying to perform all of the accents of normal English speech, but didn't actually understand the words or syntax. Kind of like one of those videos that are meant to show what English might sound like to non-English speakers. As I mentioned before, the fire wasn't providing much in terms of light. So when we'd head off to go grab some firewood, I'd usually jerry-rig my cell phone flashlight to my belt to keep the area in front of me well lit. We do this a few times, and some of the others begin to lose motivation to collect wood, so I take matters into my own hands for the last run of the evening. This brush was completely uncultivated, super thick, very dark. The only discernible paths that were about shoulder width were obstructed by an oddly fallen tree here and there. So I'm yanking at trees, trying to feel for anything dry. Even my phone light was falling behind waist-level foliage. I didn't really have too much lighting. Once I got a handful or so, I figured it'd be good enough for the last burn, so I get the idea to head back. But just as I get this thought, my phone falls straight onto the ground. So of course, it had to land face down, blocking the flash, preventing me from finding the right way. Regardless, I didn't look forward immediately. For some reason, I decided to let the darkness sink in. I had never been in such a dark environment that I was unable to see my hand in front of my face. Even the brightest moonbeams couldn't breach the canopy above. However, as I focus on my surroundings, I quickly realized I was referencing my frame using a subtle glow. It was yellowish but twisted into a green color the more I concentrated. I was immediately very startled by its lack of movement, yet curious. I hesitantly paced inward, carelessly leaving my phone on the ground. The glow split distinctly into two yellow-green bulbs that were locked onto each other. They're my eyes. My vision is really bad, especially with lighting, so from a distance my eyes will merge the source of light together. For instance, I can't see stars. This caused my curiosity to go nuts. What kind of fat raccoon is trying to stalk me through these bushes? Something was hitting me though. I was terrified. I bore a fear so intense that my stomach began to churn. My curiosity has always outweighed my fears, and this situation was no different. I began to know what it was. It began to know me. There was this very strange bond in that moment that chilled me to the core. I felt a connection to this living thing, but its eyes were pumping fear into my body. The worst mistake I'd ever make is to follow. Nervously, I yelled loud enough to attempt to startle whatever it may have been in this chilling stare down against me at only about a 7 or 8 foot distance. Its absolutely motionless reaction to my help began to chip away at my sanity. Was I staring at two elaborately placed lights in the middle of the woods? No, it couldn't be. They had eyes, and this battle cry didn't even make him flinch. Because of that, part of me rationalized that it could not possibly be any animal. It's probably some kind of prank, or a marker for some type of ecology job. So I pressed towards it again, walking as if I knew for sure that this was all to be logically explained. As I closed the gap, my vision began to home in on these lights. Plainly defined ovals, resplendent with the brightest darkness I'd ever felt, when they were legitimately just out of my range of clear vision. The lights, which were waist level before, rose up. They rose as eyes would on a bear standing onto its hind legs, instantly reducing me to a quivering mess. Odd thing is, bears don't have antlers. I haven't ever heard of a moose with piercing eyes that can stand on its hind legs either. As soon as it began straightening up, I was already getting out of there. I just ran. Luckily, I managed to kick my phone out of the dirt and quickly picked it up. The flashlight was still going, making it really easy to spot once I kicked it. Rolling through the woods, illuminating phone now in my hand, I made it back to my campfire completely out of breath. Now, normally I'd spray this story all over my friends, but I knew they'd just think I went crazy or hit my head collecting wood. Also, considering I didn't have a bundle of sticks anymore, my shortness of breath was probably a little unjustified. I sat down and noticed that my friend from before was still being very strange, but it seemed like with every passing minute he was adapting more to the conversation and was steadily attempting to contribute more and more. We're all good friends, which is why I find this unusual, considering the fact that he legitimately could not speak English 1 minute, and then within 15 he's practically back to normal. Still, something was off. He was the last to leave the campfire, even after the other guys had pissed it out, and he just stayed there staring at the ashes. After most of us had gotten home, he calls me. An entire minute of silence. The whole time I'm shouting at him to tell me where he is, and that if he's too drunk to get home, I'll go and find him. Disturbingly, he just hangs up. After a cigarette and another half a beer, he calls me back again. This time he's trying to talk like before, but he can't pronounce any words again. He never did touch that case of beer he brought, by the way. Just sat next to him during the whole fire. So I tell him to stop being an idiot and to tell me where he is. He hangs up again, leaving me to figure that he's just drunk, emotional, and that maybe I was just being a little too harsh on him. Honestly though, I was just so shaken up and I needed to confide to somebody about what I had just seen, but he was incapacitated and it frustrated me. After that, I went to bed and I figured he was just being strangely drunk. It was insanely weird to me, but I had a few drinks too and I wasn't really having any of his crap and I figured I'd try to get some sleep. When I wake up in the morning, I have a text from his roommate asking me why he saw him crawl from underneath his car in the driveway this morning. We haven't seen him since, and his roommate said he thought he'd never made it home because he didn't come in. So, what's wrong with my friend? I'm hoping he comes back because if he doesn't, my buddy just got his skin and carjacked by a flesh gate or something. So now I'm scared. Sorry for the long post, I just needed to vent and tell the story properly as I remember it. Update. He came back home around 8:30 p.m. last night, looking a little shaken up, but otherwise normal. He seems fine for now. This happened last night, so for the past 2 days, I've been reading a lot about skinwalkers. I've scourged the top posts of all time and read every single story from there, and also the local news for skinwalker stories. I live in NWT. It's the province about Alberta, about 200,000 in population, beautiful in the summer. We're surrounded by the woods and lots of lakes. There's one particular trail people often drive to access said lakes. Anyway, last night I was driving on the trail with a guy friend to find a secluded spot. He recommended V Lake, which was the first lake you access on the trail system. The way it's set up, there's a long narrow dirt road at the right of the highway that you have to drive for at least 20 minutes before you get to the lake itself. The dirt road is surrounded by trees and is riddled with little lakes here and there. It's my favorite lake to drive to, mostly because I love the narrow dirt roads with lots of tall trees. So it's Sunday night and we're the only ones driving. We weren't high or drunk, we were just having fun, listening to music. Then as I was driving, about 10 minutes into the dirt road, an extremely strong smell of rotten flesh filled our noses. This weirded my friend out and made me panic. The first thing that came to my mind was skinwalkers. It was vile and the smell just hit us all of a sudden. The windows were closed and the AC was set to the lowest. The car is clean and nothing there could have caused it. I asked him what he thought of the smell. He said barbecue. I told him there's a current fire ban in effect in the city. That can't be. He agreed and he said it smelled really rotten to him. The smell was strong. It was making me nauseous. I'm now more aware of the woods surrounding us. How it actually makes me feel kind of claustrophobic. How every turn and curve makes me more and more anxious. My gut was telling me something isn't right, and I kept thinking skinwalkers and the stories I've read up for the past 2 days. I was getting more scared by the moment. Then we drove through another curve, and my lights and high beams shone quickly on a person standing inside the mouth of the woods, and that's when I panicked. I asked my friend, "Do you still want to drive down this road?" "Yeah, I don't care," he replied. During this time, I seriously knew something wasn't right and my brain kept screaming at me to turn around. I kept glancing at my mirrors. Frank Ocean's voice wasn't calming me down. I was so scared. I think he saw my discomfort, so he piped up again. "We can turn around if you want." I slammed on my brakes and did a 4-point turn and hightailed it out of there. Once we were back on the highway of the trail, I told him about what I thought of the smell, but not the person I saw in the woods. I didn't want to freak him out. We had a long conversation about it. I knew we shouldn't have, but he kept asking questions because he was curious, so I answered, but tried not to mention its name. Also, while we were there, we were parked at the picnic ground of a lake, and little stones started hitting the driver's side of the truck. A couple would hit every minute or so. It unnerved the crap out of me, but I ignored it. There was no one else in the trail, because we didn't hear or see anyone driving. That was kind of weird too. One statement of his that kind of unnerved me was, I think it was trying to lure us further into the woods. So, on the way back, I had him drive so I could calm down. I was calmer on the drive back. There were some foxes with glowing eyes
shine, you placed your eyes on me. Did you ever know that I had mine on you? Darling, so there you are, with that look on your face, as if you never hurt, as if you never down. Shall I be the one for you, who pinches you softly but sure? If frown is shown, then I would know that you are no dreamer. So let me come to you, close as I wanna be, close enough for me to feel a heart beating fast, and stay there as I whisper how I love your peaceful eyes on me. Did you ever know that I had mine on you? Darling, so share with me your love if you have enough, your tears if you're holding back, a pain if that's what it is. How can I let you know I'm more than the dress and the clothes? Just reach me out, then you will know that you are not dreaming. Darling, so there you are, with that look on your face, as if you never hurt, as if you never down. Shall I be the one for you, who pinches you softly but sure? If frown is shown, then I would know that you are no dreamer.
in the middle of the road that kind of freaked me out at first, but then I realized they're just foxes. Also saw roadkill by the immediate side of the road that wasn't there before, which was pretty weird. It was about the size of a beaver, but really nothing to panic about, I think. So yeah, this all happened from 1 to 3 a.m. last night. I now really believe in skinwalkers. Just wasn't expecting on encountering one. My uncle, aunt, and all my cousins live in Utah, like 2 states over from me, California. They drive around a lot, especially for family reunions. My uncle often tells all the kids and everyone else a story when we go camping, mostly since someone usually wants to hear it again. He was driving back home alone one night in the summer. He knew the area well and he wasn't worried, but he was still kind of creeped out from, well, driving alone at night. He was in a long road of that sort of sparse, deserty area with the hills and bushes. My uncle then heard a weird noise, like a chirp or something. The way he described it was the first part of the he that Michael Jackson makes, without the second he. It sounds very ridiculous, I know, but unsettling in the cold, dark outdoors. And it seemed clear enough to not have just been creaking metal, or something like that. Obviously, he got a little weirded out by it. He's a lively, tough dude with the company of others, but he hates being alone. My uncle heard it from somewhat far away, but then he started hearing it again, and it was almost ramping up, getting faster. It was also getting slightly louder. He sped up, but it still continued to get closer. He looked to the left outside his window and saw something running almost parallel to his truck, pretty far off the road but inside the bush area, upright like a tall, skinny human. He said it was brown and furry, and it just bothered him. It wasn't horror movie monster scary, but it was something's wrong scary. He heard the moving of leaves. The noise was now basically constant. It sounded different, like a person sounds when they're tired and speak every syllable in one breath of air. The animal thing sort of faded into the plants. The thing was, though, he didn't feel any less scared, since now he feared it was in front of him, and that he would see it clearly on the road, but nothing happened for the rest of the ride. He usually clears out the night with his story. Camping stories are fun, but they're sort of harmless. This one gets everyone creeped out and thinking, something that wouldn't have gone away if he told